Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of Eastern Area Planning. I'm Graham Pass, Chairman of the committee. Other members of the committee present are Councillors Law, Linden, Mays, Jeffrey, Somner, McKinnon and Woodhams. We will come to apologies in a minute. The following officers are also in attendance to advise and support the meeting. Alice Atwood, a Senior Planning Officer for item number 1. Mehdi Rezai, who is our Interim Development Control Manager. Matthew Shepherd, Senior Planning Officer for item 2. Gareth Dowding on Zoom, a Principal Engineer to advise us on highway matters. Sharon Armour, our Principal Lawyer, sitting to my left to keep us all on the straight and narrow. Carolyn Richardson, Service Manager for the Joint Emergency Planning Unit, for any questions about DEPZs or anything else. Jess Bayliss, our Democratic Services Minute Taker, and Tom Dunn, who is our Zoom host. Now, before we start proceedings, I'd like to explain for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching that tonight's meeting is being held both over Zoom and with councillors present and in the council chamber. Although there are no longer any formal restrictions regarding COVID, the council is continuing to adhere to safe working arrangements. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Please can I ask everyone present in the meeting to make sure they switch on their microphones when invited to speak and to speak directly into them, and of course to switch them off when they have finished. Can I also ask you to make sure you put your mobile phones to silent and have turned off the sound on your tablets, which we have already tested. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via a safe emergency exit route, which will be shown to us by our trained officers present. Please follow any instructions given by the officers. The assembly point is in the car park of the Dolphin Pub, very handily. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain seated and await instructions from officers, and we will adjourn the meeting until such time as it is safe to proceed. Do members have any questions about the way in which this meeting will be conducted before we proceed? I take the silence as no. Jessica, do we have apologies, please?
Yes, Chairman. So apologies have been received from Councillor Alan Macro, and Councillor Owen Jeffrey is in attendance as a substitute.
Thank you very much. Members, circulated separately, you have the minutes, you have hard copies in front of you from our meeting held on the 1st of June. Do I have anyone wishing to make any comments on those minutes, or may I have a proposal?
Propose, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. May I sign? In that case, I will sign them as a true and correct record. Members, declarations of interest. Well, I think I'll probably speak for most if I say that, of course, we do know ex-councillor Chopping and indeed ex-councillor Cornwall. Some of us may well remember from this chamber from slightly longer before that. Do I take it that this is on block? If you could just indicate.
Propose on block, Chair.
Or in that case.
I think Councillor Mays has got his hand up.
Councillor Mays, do you have a further declaration?
Yes, Chairman, I have met the other Chopping family members other than Keith, and Penny and the daughter I have met, as they are local councillors in our area. Thank you. But I won't be doing anything that's illegal.
I'm sure you won't. Members, are there any other declarations of interest? No, right. Oh, sorry, Councillor McKinnon.
Just in relation to the first application tonight, Chairman, I'm not the ward member, but I do live nearby and I use the recreation ground and the playground, as does my family. So just for full transparency, declaring that now.
Thank you very much, Councillor McKinnon. In that case, without further ado, let us go straight to application number 1, which is the Pavilion, Recreation Ground, Recreation Road in Burfield Common, Reading. What I will do first is ask our Planning Officer, Alice Atwood, to introduce the item. We will then go through all those wishing to speak, and I will give you guidance for those who are here, and indeed those of you who will appear on Zoom, and you'll be invited into the virtual room on screen at the appropriate time. You will have up to 5 minutes to make your case. I'm renowned for saying it's 5 minutes is the absolute maximum, not a target. And you will be cut off at 5 minutes. I have a stopwatch in front of me. If there's more than one of you wishing to speak, I'm very happy to give you guidance, half time, minute to go, or whatever you wish. So please tell me what you require when it's your turn. For those of you in the room, there's a lectern sit right in front of you with a button to the right of the microphone stand, which will illuminate the microphone so we can all hear you, and it will be live streamed. As always, members, if we have questions for our planning officer, if you could just please hold them until all those wishing to make representations have spoken, because quite often those questions are answered by those speaking. But of course, we will be able to quiz our planning officer in absolute detail after that, before we start the debate. So, Alice, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I need to do 2 verbal updates. The first is that there is an error on page 2 of the agenda. The officer recommendation should read to delegate to the Service Director of Development and Regulation to refuse planning permission. That's just purely for clarity. The second verbal update is we received a letter of objection from the Burfield Common Residents Group today at 12:10 p.m. This letter has indicated that the group has written to the Secretary of State for Levelling Up and Housing and Communities to request that they call this permission in for their determination. At the time of entering the meeting, officers have received a request from a representative of the Secretary of State to let them know the outcome of this permission. Just to let members know that this shouldn't affect their deliberations tonight. It simply means that we'll make a recommendation, but we cannot issue a decision for 21 days. Okay, that's all for the updates. So this is for the erection of a temporary cafe, brackets, prefabricated unit for temporary mission for 5 years. It's located within the Burfield Common Recreation Ground, which is on the Recreation Road. And the site is surrounded by mature trees and is a play park and has multi-user games area and a car park. There's a public right-of-way to the northwest of the site, but this will remain unaffected by the development. This is the existing block plan. And this is the proposed block plan. As you can see, the temporary cafe is situated between the sports pavilion and the play park. The temporary cafe will be oriented so the views are over the play park and the car park. This is the proposed site plan. You can see that the proposed cafe is 10 meters long, 8 meters deep, and 3 meters high, with a gross internal area of 79 square meters. The planned cafe is to have 24 seats and have a takeaway service for beverages and snacks for the local community. The proposed temporary caf, the walls will be dark grey metal with white UPVC windows and doors. And this is a proposed elevation from the southeast. This is proposed elevation from the northwest, northeast, southwest. This is the floor plan here. As you can see, it has its own facilities, kitchen and seating area. And this is a section drawing. Okay, so now we have some photos. And this is from the southeast. This is a close-up of the site. The ping pong tennis is going to be relocated elsewhere in the park. And that's sort of looking behind where the building would be. You can see the views that it would have. This is the close-up of the sports pavilion. And you can see the cycle stands there. The proposal would add an extra 2 cycle stands. This is behind the sports pavilion, just so you can see where the mature trees are. This is a picture of the entrance to the footpath to the northwest of the site. This is a view east of the corner of School Lane. You can see the traffic restrictions there, and you can also see this is where in the planning statement they say that deliveries will partly take place. This is from the north, viewing the site in. This is from across the pavement, so you can see from the public realm. From the corner of Recreation Road, looking into the site. This is the view down Recreation Road. Again, just to give you an idea of the parking restrictions. And this is the car park, just to give you an idea of the size. So there has been quite a lot of representations with this application. I will now go through the main concerns and considerations. So the principle of development, this is in settlement, and Burfield Common is a rural service centre, which means it has a range of services and reasonable public transport. So it does have the principle of development. The character and appearance, officers ask councillors to view this in the context of that is the temporary 5-year permission, and that's how we've viewed it. Concerns have been raised in regards to crime. We believe that this could, we have reviewed this, and we've also reviewed how it looks in its situation, and we feel on balance that because it's temporary, that it would be compliance with CS14 and CS19. Our highways officers have also reviewed the scheme, and they have also reviewed all representations, and they have looked into Thames Valley's objection about a lack of parking. They agree that this is compliant with our parking policies, and therefore we do not seek a refusal on the basis of highway safety or lack of parking. We feel the proposal is a efficient distance away, not to cause issues to neighbouring amenity. Due to the nature of this being a recreational ground, the prevailing noise landscape is one that there is moderate noise, and we do feel a cafe would be compatible with that. We believe that there wouldn't be a negative impact on green infrastructure. We believe this because the cafe would be ancillary to the recreation ground. The application is in the DPZ, and unfortunately, due to the nature of the building, we've looked at it, and it's not a permanent building. It wouldn't offer sufficient protection in the case of an emergency. Therefore, it has sustained a rejection from officers, and an objection from the Office of Nuclear Regulation have objected on public health grounds. And the proposal does gain support under C10, as it would create 5 jobs for 5 years. We don't believe there's any tree or ecology issues. We don't believe there's any flooding issues. The temporary permission, 5 years is the absolute maximum, the upper limit of what we consider acceptable. The youth class can be secured by condition, and there isn't a, even though this is fallback, there isn't a fallback position because this meets the development definition under section 55 1A of the Act. That's all from me. If members have any questions.
We'll save those till a little later, but thank you for a comprehensive introduction to that. Those wishing to speak, first of all, Parish Council, Councillor Tim Ansell. Councillor Ansell, please go to the lectern. May I assist you with any timekeeping?
Yes, I believe that would be useful. Sort of probably a 1 minute warning towards the end.
I will do that with pleasure.
Is the microphone on?
If you press the button on the right on the actual thing, it should light up.
There's 2 buttons on the front. There's one on the right hand side. There we go.
There we go. Right, thank you very much. Right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tim Ansell, Chair of Burfield Parish Council. Burfield Common is the largest of the residential areas within the parish of Burfield, with a population of approximately 6,000 people. Located halfway between Burfield Village and Mortimer, there are no pubs or cafes, apart from a 30-cover charity cafe that operates 2 mornings a week from the Wooden Methodist Hall, when they have enough volunteers. The recreation ground is at the centre of Burfield Common and is consequently the location for many varied activities. There is a constant activity on the recreation ground with dozens of dog walkers before and after work, and increasingly during the day as more and more people work from home. The children's play area attracts many families, especially after school, in addition to the Keep Fit classes and other ad hoc activities. At the weekends and during the week in the summer, Burfield Football Club play games on the rec, which attracts supporters both local and from across the country. It is actually an official FA ground. Local derbies can attract in excess of 100 supporters. In addition to year-round use, in the summer there is a pop-up pub attracting over 100 customers on a Friday night, plus their families, and a pop-up cafe. Annually there is Burfest, which attracts 2,000 people on each of the days it is held. The only events that cause parking problems are the football games, as many of our participants and supporters are not local by definition and consequently drive. The aim of the cafe is to provide somewhere for the residents of Burfield Common to meet and socialise throughout the year on an ad hoc basis. Before COVID, such a facility would have been viewed as serving young families and people who do not work. Since COVID, there has been a significant increase in the number of residents who work from home and therefore miss out on the social activities, and increasingly there's feelings of loneliness and isolation. A big part of the reason this plan has been moved forward is very much around caring about the mental health of parishioners, as we see the impact of people being increasingly isolated. The temporary nature of the cafe relates to the time it will be on the recreation ground. It is not a temporary building. It is purpose-built. It is, however, portable. The construction is very similar to that of a number of classrooms at the local schools. The plan is to establish whether there is a desire in the local community that matches the interest on surveys to have the cafe, and whether it will be financially viable. At the end of the period, the building will be sold as a fully functioning cafe. The reason for the Parish Council setting a period of 5 years maximum is to provide 2 years of operation to establish the financial viability, and 3 years to go through design and obtain planning permission before construction of a new facility in keeping with the local environment. In the event of an emergency, customers inside the cafe will have access to running water, toilet facilities and food, compared to other local buildings such as the library, the adjacent pavilion and village hall, where there is no food kept. In the event of an emergency, whilst the cafe is open, a procedure will need to be agreed on what happens to the other users of the recreation ground, as the cafe users will often be a very small proportion of the total users of the site. To address the concern about how the cafe will impact the emergency plan, the cafe is aimed at the current use of the recreation ground, dog walkers who like a coffee as they exercise their dogs, parents of the children who would like somewhere to sit, protected from the elements while they watch their children in the play area, and local residents who just need to get out of their house and go for a walk and meet with friends. The impact of the cafe on the number of the people on the recreation ground will be minimal. Finally, this concern could be completely mitigated by closing during the times of the organised football games.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. Each football game has a minimum of 30 people, 24 players, substitutes, referees, managers and coaches, plus supporters, at least half of whom are from outside of Berkshire Common. This is more than the cafe can accommodate. Therefore, closing it at these times would mean a zero impact on the number of people required to be covered in the plan. I'd like to thank you for giving me your time.
Please remain there, Councillor Ansell, because members may well have questions for you. Members, over to you. Any questions, please? Councillor Law.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to clarify the building next to the proposed cafe,
Yeah,
changing rooms, but I understand there's a bar in there and there's a kitchen and
there's not a, that is where the pop-up pub operates from. There's not a bar in there. There is a small kitchen.
but there is a pop-up pub is what you described.
Yes, but there's no pub facilities there. It's just the kitchen's used. The bar gets set up in that kitchen. It's not like a proper bar set up in a rugby club. All of the drinking activity happens outside. It's only used as a serving hatch. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you've answered my question. I was really going to say, why do you need why do we need the so-called cafe when you've got facilities next door?
Yeah, it's a changing room, showers, and referee room and toilets. That's all there is in there.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Any other members have any other questions for the Parish Council? I'm looking. No. Oh, Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to probe a little bit the survey that you mentioned, consultation that was taking place. Obviously, we've got quite a mixed response coming forward on this at the moment, as we can all see.
Yes.
But I'd like to know a little bit more about that, how it was done, what sort of responses you had, what sort of response rate you had.
So I might have to come back on the details of the response. The survey, we did regular surveys as a parish council prior to COVID. And one of the things that came up time and time again, one of the key things was around increased rental space from the parish council available for people to rent. There was originally the idea of a hub set up when it looked like we were going to be forced to close the library because the building couldn't be used. And one of the things that kept coming up was a cafe, because actually somewhere for people to meet. So as a parish council, we've refurbished the village hall, increased the amount of rooms that can be rented. So that covered off that aspect of it. We managed to come up with a plan with West Berk so that we didn't have to close the library. So that element of it was covered. So that just left the constant question about, are we going to get a cafe or somewhere where people can meet? Because that's the kind of gap in the village, if you see what I mean. There's nowhere where you can just meet with people easily.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members? Councillor Ansell, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, Tom, we have two objectors. If you could bring them into the room, please, on screen, on Zoom. And tell me, please, when they are here.
Just bring them in, Mr. Chairman. They're both with us, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Hello, Miss Elmore and Miss Aubrey. Can you hear us? I believe you're both. Oh, no.
No.
We can't see you, though.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, I can see Miss Elmore. There you are. Good evening.
Good evening.
There's a video button probably on the bottom left. Oh,
Thank you.
very good evening to you both. Now, you have up to 5 minutes to share. When you've made your presentation, if you'd please stay on the screen, because members may well have questions they wish to ask you. If I can assist you with any timekeeping, I'm here to do that. So shall I tell you perhaps when half time, 2.5 minutes is up? And then a minute to go as well. How's that? Okay. Right. Your time starts when you start talking.
The location is not suitable and puts residents at risk. Health and safety issues. Biggest concern is safety. Residents are very concerned about the safety of deliveries, collections on a blind bend with no stopping and double yellow, forcing people into the road, close to the school, on bus routes, footpaths. The wrecked car park is no good as the height restriction barriers, which large, wide vehicles cannot use and obstruct in and outgoing traffic. As dog walkers may wish to use the CAF, dogs will have to be tied up outside. With this in mind, next to a play area, the children, not fully supervised, may approach the animals and possibly get bitten. Concern also will be dog theft. The police have voiced their concern through safety and ASB, both from the crime prevention team and the policing team. This village is, over the years, are seeing more of this. The ONR and emergency planning teams from AWE consider the building construction not suitable to protect users as the plot is inside the DEPZ. Do we as a community value the provision of latte over the health and safety of residents and users of the development? Impact on community. Design of the CAF is not in any way keeping with the design of the local buildings. The definition of temporary in this case is not counted in weeks but years. So this development should be in keeping with the surrounding buildings, which it is not. Proposed opening hours are excessively long and incorporate, which will impact local houses. Measures for ASB, littering and crime are insufficient for the kind of development planned. Plans to allow local groups to use the development will increase the nuisance to residents in our rural community. Parking. Based on the current use of the wreck, the current car park is already insufficient, which is why the PC bans other parking at the village hall, as it is used as overflow. Access to the wreck for wreck purposes, the parking issues will restrict people using the wreck for its intended use.
Off time.
Alternatives. By the applicants who own admission when they refuse CAF B an extra operating day per week at the pavilion on the ground that there was no demand. There is no need for a development of this kind with all its costs and impacts. Now most people have returned to work. There are alternatives. Allow CAF B to operate more days of the week at the underused pavilion. Run CAF services out of the newly refurbished village hall if more space is required. There are plenty of food retail and CAFs operating very close proximity. Summary. Our parish council is supposed to support and protect all residents, but in this case, they are pushing for a vanity project that is not justified, and it seems they value revenue over social well-being, but they have no remit to build as they fail to consult the residents and favour a development that puts the residents at risk. Please respect us as a rural community. Reject this poorly thought through proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miss Elmore. You have about 1 minute and 10 seconds.
Right. Good evening. I wish to reiterate my objection to this proposal as a concerned resident, and will try to keep it brief, something I'm not very known for. I manage an extensive investment portfolio, which includes CAFs, so I have quite a bit of knowledge. The officers or applicants have not given an adequate thought or consideration for waste in deliveries for the continued safe use of the highway. The logistics involved 7 days a week are massive. The proposer advised highways, the waste management is the same as the existing pavilion. To my knowledge, there is none. I cannot find anything. Bags are collected once a week and taken to the village hall. Consideration should also be taken that giving permission for this commercial development on a protected village green has the capacity to set a precedent on other village greens within Burfield, surrounding villages and further afield. I would ask the committee to please not underestimate the serious concerns based and to consider rejection. No objection. I have no objection to a pop-up pub or a cafe in the village, but not on the village green. And unless we're moved, there aren't beer pumps in the pavilion.
I must ask you to make your conclusion, please.
My conclusion is, with the objections you've got, I see we've already had which is quite normal, that it has been pulled elsewhere, but this is quite normal procedure for the last 3 years where it gets thinged around. But I felt I've knocked a child down on that corner. I have.
I'll have to get you to stop. I have let you go 30 seconds.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I feel I've got over what I wanted to get over.
Remain there for any questions you may have from members. Members, any questions? Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to continue on a theme, which is unlike me, in all honesty. And it's around the consultation, because we've just heard that there was no consultation, and yet we heard previously that there was consultation. And I'd like to know, specifically stated by Ms Aubrey, as to why you feel there was no consultation, please.
Well, many people in the village, some of them didn't even know nothing about it. Most of the consultation goes down to when they held the Mayfair, and a lot of the residents do not go down to the Mayfair from the village, especially the elderly. So how are they going to find out about this project? It's like the CAF, the new proposal of the CAF. We did not see that information until it come through in the news magazine. That is the first time we actually saw the unit and everything else. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, again, just coming back to something that Miss Aubrey mentioned. Miss Aubrey, you mentioned that deliveries would be taking place on a blind bend and on double yellow lines. Now, I note that our highways contribution to the report doesn't make any mention of this, so I was just wondering where you can tell me where you've got that information from, particularly about the double yellows.
Well, there is double yellows around there, around the bend. And also there's on West Park's map, there is areas where there's no waiting and everything else. But there is yellow lines along there, double yellow lines.
Are there double yellows everywhere around there? So it wouldn't be possible to have deliveries that weren't illegally parked. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because all there is space parking on that corner. Round the corner, you've got a footpath, you've got a public footpath coming the other way for the public, and also you've got a person's driveway from two houses.
Yeah.
So where is it safe?
Well, I do know the area quite well. And,
Sorry.
I would say there probably are spaces where you could have a delivery without being in double yellows, but thank you for that. We'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you.
We can pursue that further with our highways officer, and indeed our planning officer has photographic evidence of yellow lines in various places, which I'm sure we can put back on the screen. Members, any other questions to the objectors? I see none. Ladies, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
If we could have the supporter, Miss Godding, please, Tom, if you could advise me when she is in the room.
The supporter is in the room, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Miss Godding. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can see you. Now,
Yeah,
you have up to 5 minutes all to yourself here. Can I help you with the timekeeping?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. But please remain there for any questions members may have when you're finished.
Okay. So I'm a supporter of the temporary cafe facility at the recreation ground. I was really pleased to see this application go in and was a really early supporter of it. It was great to see people responding to the application based on its own merits. A lot of support had gone in very early on. And this was before the scaremongering tactics by a small group of community members began. I think it's a real shame that the level of untrue and misleading information has led to a large number of objections being made based on false claims, and therefore overshadowing genuine objections and honest opinions. I have lived in the village for more than 10 years, and in that time I have loved getting to know other parishioners and villagers. For a village, Burfield has a lot going for it. I've supported Cafe B at the Methodist Church, who provided me somewhere to escape to when being home with my newborn got a little bit too much. The Santas work tirelessly year-round to host events for us. The pop-up pubs, Boxcart and Burfest all bring people together and are really, really popular. The Burfield Residents Association run the annual Mayfair, which we've heard, and this year's event was the biggest and busiest it has ever been, showing that people want places to go. The two pubs at the bottom of the village also host events, and which are successful. What to me this is obvious, it obviously shows, is how we're a village that are reliant on community events and to bring people together. There is very little for us to do in terms of facilities. There's very few facilities for people to meet. Everything we have is based on a one-off or is run on an unreliable schedule. For comparison, Mortimer, our neighbouring village, with a smaller population than Burfield, has an incredible range of facilities, and including a cafe, which goes really well. I think the cafe would be a really valuable addition to our community. Whilst we do have a pop-up cafe a couple of times a week, we need someone with reliable and consistent opening times. The location of the recreation ground is ideal. It means families can visit the park and go there together, but it also means that it's in such a central location that everybody can walk to it. The recreation ground itself won't suffer material harm from the temporary building. A proportion of the green to be affected is small. Another thing that has really stood out to me living here is the amount that the parish council does for our residents. It's been refreshing to see a government department asking the villagers what they want and then acting on it. We've been asked numerous times what we want, and the results speak for themselves. And again, I'm going to go back to the consultation that's been done. So in 2017, we got a survey and 86% of the residents said that they wanted a cafe in the hub facility, which was on offer at the time. When the council reviewed the survey in 2019 and asked for the top 3 project ideas for a hub, a cafe was the highest scorer. It comes top time and time again. The council are trying to meet the needs of the majority and accepting that you will never please everybody all of the time. And they've done this whilst lowering our council tax. I'm a pretty happy resident. I've read the letter from the emergency planning officer and had a number of observations and queries which I hope that the council can give consideration to. So currently anyone attending the rec has no protection should there be an incident, which according to the booklet that we get given every year is extremely unlikely. Surely even a temporary facility would be better than nothing at all on the chance that it might be needed. Sorry. I personally wouldn't mind being stuck in a temporary facility with plenty of food, drink and facility should I need to be. Also, she writes that the existing pavilion building could possibly support the cafe, but that the buildings aren't linked. Could the council consider linking them to meet the requirements of the planning officer? And could planning be granted subject to that connection being made? Going off on a little bit of a tangent for a second, but perhaps more alarming to me personally is that the proposed building is one of those, is similar in design to those used in the village for other reasons, such as the primary school. I have a soon-to-be primary school age child, and should that mean that I should be concerned by you declaring that the cafe wouldn't be safe to be in an emergency? Does that mean the primary school isn't either? I would be interested to know how West Berkshire Council plans to deal with that. So from all other consulted bodies of experts, there were no objections, showing any objections based on traffic, parking, noise, antisocial behaviour, etc. shouldn't be a concern. I feel that the cafe meets the needs and wants of the majority of Burfield, and I hope the council can consider all genuine viewpoints and opinions and come to a resolution as to how this facility can go ahead. Thank you.
Well timed. Thank you very much. Members, questions? No? Pausing. We're going to let you off lightly. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We now come to the applicant agent. We have Mr. Paul Lawrence, who's here in person, and we have potentially 2, Mr. Greaves and Mr. Morse. Tom, maybe one, maybe not coming, but if you could try and let me know, I'd be grateful. Okay. Right. Mr. Morse, Mr. Greaves, good evening. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Good. We see you, Mr. Oh, Video's coming. We see you both. Thank you. Now, Mr. Lawrence, who's in the room, said to you, Mr. Morse, that you can go first, but you do have, as a group, up to 5 minutes to share. So if you talk for 4.5, it only leaves 30 seconds for others. So can I assist you with any timekeeping?
I'll be fine, and I'll be very brief.
All right, well, after you, Mr. Morse, and Mr. Greaves, do you wish to speak next, or Mr. Lawrence?
Mr. Lawrence can speak. We are kind of covering off for each other, so I probably won't speak.
Okay, thank you very much. But if you'd remain on screen, and indeed at the lectern, Mr. Lawrence, after the presentation for any questions members may have. Mr. Morse, your time starts now.
As a qualified architect with some 25 years and expert in building technology, I'm here to comment on the build and structural quality of the proposed cafe structure in light of the objection relating to detailed emergency planning zone. There is some confusion within the document about traditional construction, which I wish to clarify. The structure is modular off-site construction and typical of modern methods of construction. No different in its robustness and permanence, than that of bricks and mortar. Indeed, many new houses and commercial buildings are constructed using the same technology as this cafe. I hope to allay the previous speakers' concerns about school buildings. It is different. It's only different in that new houses have a decorative cosmetic skin of brickwork that is applied to them. This is the only difference. It is therefore important to note this building will meet strict and comprehensive standards of the building regulations, no different from a new build house or commercial building. We need to get rid of our idea of what a prefab is. It is not the 1970s classroom. It would be constructed using stringent air tightness standards, fully insulated with standalone heating system. Its windows would be fully sealed and double, if not triple glazed, and meet the requirements of the building regulations in terms of security, robustness, and air tightness. Built to the same standards and structural integrity, the cafe is over 500 square feet inside, and again will readily accommodate 29 people with sufficient ablutions, fresh water, and toilet facilities. In summary, it is a robust building built to modern standards, which will fully meet requirements of the building regulations and should not be considered any different from any other new build building. I finish there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lawrence, you have over 3 minutes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Chairman and members. To start with, BPC feel it's worth providing a little bit of background and history to this application. In 2016, West Berkshire Council planned to close Burfield Library. Burfield Parish Council looked for a financial sustainable situation or solution that would keep the library open and add some much needed additional rentable space and a cafe for the community to get together. The Parish Council had the idea of community hub to accommodate the library and provide additional rental space and the cafe previously mentioned. In 2017, the Parish Council surveyed the residents to understand the community's priorities, and one of the top priorities has been previously mentioned is a community hub, including a cafe. During 2018, West Berkshire and Burfield Parish Council worked together to enable the library to remain open in its current building at the Willink School, so negating the requirement for the library move. In 2019, the Parish Council surveyed the residents again, and again, the top priority for Burfield residents is a community hub, including the cafe. Obviously, in 2020, COVID hit and the village hall had to close and couldn't reopen under the new regulations without extensive refurbishment works. The Parish Council took this opportunity to modernise the village hall, provide the ventilation to meet the new regulations and provide some additional rental space. So we've moved away from rental space in that new hub. During 2021, the Parish Council established a low-cost solution to test the viability was the best solution to enable the community cafe for the residents of Burfield, and it brings us to the application now before the committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, Mr. Greaves, if you wish to add anything, you have over a minute to left if you wish.
No, I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Members, any questions? Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to ask Mr. Morse. So is this clear that in your opinion as an architect, it would meet the same grounds of a permanent building in the defence planning zone. Much. I mean, I know it's a different criteria, but we on appeal, of course, I think it was an Aldi that was built in Tadley on our boundary with Tadley. So I just wanted to confirm that comment that you made, because I know our emergency planning manager doesn't think so. And I'll also ask a question when it comes to the officer's part. Thank you.
As a structure, it's fabricated in a factory to tight design standards, much more rigorously than it would be in the rain and on site. Its junctions are therefore more airtight. Its build quality and airtightness is important, as are all new buildings, and therefore will be resistant, as a new build house would be, to any fallout. It is structurally robust. It is insulated. It is ventilated. It is heated. It is exactly the same. It is simply that it is manufactured off-site, as are a significant number of buildings nowadays. No different from a Wilson home or a retail unit. This is common and modern technology. So I think I'm here to allay the fears that this isn't a 1970s prefab, but a robust piece of modern construction.
Thank you, Mr. Mawson. Thank you, Chairman.
Right. Councillor Mays.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Again, for Mr. Morse. Can you tell me if the foundations for this temporary building are solid, they're stripped concrete foundations? And would they be usable for a replacement vehicle in a replacement building in a few years' time?
It's likely the nature of these buildings, whilst we haven't procured it yet, it will either be built on strip foundations, depending on ground conditions, subject to a structural survey, or can on occasion be built on pads. But it does depend on the ground conditions, and we haven't got that far yet because we obviously haven't invested that time, and we need the planning consent. In answer to your question, they will be sufficient to support the structure.
Fine, thank you. But on the question of air tightness, which may be relevant when we're talking about the DPZ and any possible contamination, would you be happy with one toilet for maybe 24 people in there for 2 days?
For a period of 48 hours, I think that would be fine.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. If I could then go on to talk to Mr. Lawrence. Is Mr. Lawrence available still?
I'm here.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm staying right in front of you.
It's the street. Can you tell me basically whether you're trying to do this as an economic test as to the viability of the cafe before it gets put into a permanent situation?
Yes, is the simple answer.
It's basically a test.
Yes.
Test.
It's a minimum viability.
Fine. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other members have any questions for the applicant and agent, please? I see none. Gentlemen, thank you. We now turn to the ward members. We have hopefully Councillor Bridgman on Zoom. If you could please tell me, Tom, when he is available. We have Councillor Mays, who said that he didn't wish to speak as ward member, but we have Councillor Longton, who is in the room. Please remain there, Councillor Longton. And I will, when Councillor Bridgman is here, I will explain the rules, as I'm sure you know them anyway.
Councillor Bridgman is in the room, Mr. Chairman.
Indeed. Can you hear us, Councillor Bridgman?
I can indeed, Chairman. Thank you.
Right. Gentlemen, you have two of you wishing to speak. You have up to 5 minutes. How you divide the time is up to you. How can I assist you with timekeeping?
Well, Chairman, if I may start, I'll try to keep myself to 2.5 minutes. I've got a timer in front of me. I'm going to be pretty brief and then see what Royce wants to say.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, can I just, my legal officer needs to. Oh, right. So Councillor Longton is in the room. It's okay, no problem. Okay, it's Councillor Bridgman. I'll tell you when 2.5 minutes is up, and it's then up to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, members, most of the issues I think are dealt with in the report. In particular, the police and parking objections are dealt with by highways, and I ask you you'll have read that, and you can ask officers and highways officers are necessary in relation to that. I really want to concentrate on the principal issue, which I think that in front of us, which I think is the DEPZ and the emergency planning position. Members, let me start by commenting that of course, as you know, the DEPZ is based on a circle, which is drawn from the centre of the AWE site in question. And then the hedgehog of the DPZ is drawn around it so as to incorporate communities and make sure that communities aren't split. In this case, let me point out that that circle, 3.16 kilometres, this site falls outside the circle. So it's in the DPZ, but outside the circle on which it's based. And that's quite important when one looks at other events that take place in Burfield, because I want to concentrate on the comments I made to officers about other things that go on where people have no shelter at all. This was raised by the supporter. You have Burfest with a couple of thousand people on this site. You have a pop-up pub from time to time. It's only a few weeks a year, which can have a few hundred people. You have the Mayfair down the hill, which is right bang in the middle of that circle and has hundreds of people over a weekend out in the open with no shelter at all. So I really do question, we've got to get these issues right. I do think this is a proposal that needs careful consideration. And let us remember, it is for 24 covers. And given what has been said by the architect, I do think that 24 covers, if they were all there at the same time, could be accommodated in an emergency. So I invite you to reflect on that. Perhaps look at the question of an emergency plan, which could be entered into with emergency planning. This is something I raised with Carolyn earlier. We've had a conversation about it. Hasn't reached a conclusion, but I leave you to explore that one. And that's my time up, I think, Chairman.
With 10 seconds to go, Councillor Longton, over to you. Please remain there. We can see and hear you.
Right. Thank you, Chairman. Burfield Common is a thriving rural community with an excellent community spirit. It has many communal facilities, but currently lacks a community space where residents can get together to socialise and discuss local affairs. We're very grateful to the Methodist Church for serving coffee in the church hall, but as we've heard, this facility is restricted in hours, and we badly need a full-blown cafe as is being proposed here by the Parish Council. I'd like to comment briefly on this proposal, and in particular to challenge some of the statements made by a group of parishioners in their widely distributed leaflet, Save Our Village Green. Yes, indeed, the cafe is proposed for the recreation ground, known locally as the Village Green, but it will only occupy about 1.3% of the total area of the rec. And it's to be built in a corner close to the existing changing rooms. It will provide much needed extra facilities. As I say, we need a cafe in Burfield, and certainly will not destroy the Village Green to any significant extent. The protesters sometimes claim that the community has not been consulted, but in fact, we've heard this evening that there has been widespread consultation with the community over the past 5 years. This has resulted, for example, in the dropping of the original community hub proposal. The leaflet these people have distributed states that delivery vehicles to the cafe will park on the pavement in School Lane, blocking traffic and forcing pedestrians into the road on a blind bend. But no, it is now proposed that the relatively few delivery vehicles will use the existing recreation ground car park with no direct access from School Lane, as I understand it. All in all, I think this is an excellent proposal, and if we can overcome the DPZ issue, I hope it goes ahead. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Longton. Members, questions for the ward members? We don't appear to have any. I'm pausing just for another second or two. No, we'll let you off lightly, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, well, before we enter debate, questions to our officers. We have our planning officer, we have our emergency planning officer, We have highways officers, so they're all available to ask questions. Councillor Law, I saw you first.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got two questions, one to the case officer and one to Caroline, the emergency planning lead. First one, we heard from the architect, the agent, I can't remember which, that when the question about foundations was asked, he said we may very well have to dig foundations, typical foundations, or we may use a pad. The question to the officer is, if they have to dig foundations, is this a temporary building? Because I've had experience of the same sort of thing in my own village, and the conclusion from not this committee, but from planning was that I've got to put permanent foundations down. It's not temporary. So I'd like that clarified, please. And the question to Caroline Richardson is, we've heard the comments from, particularly from one of the ward members about the being outside the actual circle and the number of other activities, including on the field itself with sports going on, et cetera, et cetera. I'd like her defense as to why she has said this should be refused on health and safety grounds.
Right. Alice, if you could guide us with the first part, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So in the application form, the agent has put the following for the proposal description, which is erection of a temporary cafe, brackets, prefabricated unit, and that's all. So that's one thing. Looking at the submission, I understand what he's just said in his 5 minutes, but that's not reflected in the submission in which we make our judgments and which I have written my report. When it comes to foundations, that's not something that planning normally gets involved with, but in the ways of control, we would have if this was to, let's say, get overturned, we have a condition in place, which means the land has to be returned back to normal within 5 years. So obviously, if they were to dig serious foundations, then they still need to put it back exactly how it was, and they'd all need to come up. Hopefully that answers that.
I think so, Chairman. I think what I'm hearing, Alice, is it's not really the type of foundation, as long as it can be, after 5 years, put back to the way it was. Okay, thanks.
Caroline Richardson, can you hear us?
I can hear you all, and apologies, I cannot for the life of me get my camera to work tonight. Jumping from Zoom to Teams and things like that has made a mess of it. So you'll just have to put up with a blank screen, I'm afraid. On the point about the DPZ, it's Councillor Bridgman is correct in relation to that when the detailed emergency planning zone is set, it is initially set on the an area that is set by AWE as the operator, and it is called the gosh, we're just having a urgent protection area where urgent protection actions need to be undertaken. It is outside that area. However, the legal requirement for the council in determining the DPZ is set by the regulators, and hence the shape that we've got now. So the DPZ is bigger than that circle that Councillor Bridgman mentioned. The result of that is that the regulators, the Office for Vehicular Regulation, require the council to assure them that we can look after people within the DPZ. Hence, when new applications come forward, we have to be able, as a council, to assure them that we can actually accommodate them. And I say that we, as a council, when these planning applications come forward, it's not just the council that actually reviews them. We have an off-site emergency planning group, because obviously responding to an AWE incident is not just going to be the council. It's a wide number of agencies. I think that on the last count, I think there's 27 different agencies. So we look at all of these planning applications coming in based on the fact that we're to look at to accommodate everything, if you like, and everybody within the DEPZ. So 27 agencies look at that planning application. So whilst it's our name on the ticket, if you like, it's all these other agencies that have been involved. So that's where the legal bit comes into it, if you like, is because of the size of the DEPZ that we've got to provide assurance to the regulators. And I think sort of going back to then and indeed what Alice has just said regarding the makeup of the actual building, again, there was no details regarding that actually provided to us other than a prefabricated building, and on that basis, in particular consulting with our experts in this, which is the UKHSA, formerly known as Public Health England, but the radiation specialists, we consulted with them, and it was heavily laden because of their advice that the recommendation that the actual structure of the building was not suitable as a prefabricated building. I think I'll stop there if there's any other questions.
Thank you for that, Councillor Law. Does that satisfy your question? It does.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks, Chairman. And again, a question to Carolyn. Carolyn, I'm sure you were expecting a few questions tonight. I wanted to just pass over a couple of comments from earlier contributors. I think Ms. Godding mentioned that there's temporary accommodation that's used in schools. And I thought hers was a reasonable question to put to you about are her children safe in the event of an emergency in similar temporary accommodation? Should she be worried if we're saying that this type of temporary accommodation is not suitable for a cafe of 24 people? So yeah, I just appreciate your comments on that, Caroline.
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head because I don't actually know the full details about the construction of those buildings either, or in this case. But what I would say is we work with all the schools, and we have at least an annual meeting with them with respect to what they would do should there be an AWE incident and they have to go in effectively into lockdown or something of that nature. So we do work with them. So I couldn't tell you the specifics. I'm not familiar with the exact construction. If that was the case, then obviously we would work with the schools.
Okay, Councillor McKinnon. Thank you, Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. So really, again, it'll be to Alice and Carolyn. I think it was the Aldi application, wasn't it, that was given permission on our side of the Tadley border with Hampshire. So in terms of the actual building as such and what Mr. Morse said, would you give an opinion on that, or do you think that it's not really relevant?
The scale of those two applications are completely different, but also the merits are completely different. The Aldle/Lidl was a permanent building, and I believe there was different issues. In this case as well, it's due to the small size of it, the 48-hour period that they'd all have to be in there together was deemed unacceptable as well. So it's not just this about the building being unsuitable and not affording protection, but it's also the size of it, the small size of it.
Right, thank you. And to Carolyn, I think you've answered most of it, but Mr. Morse was quite clear that the building quality is much higher than the people that you consulted in terms of building, like on houses, whatever. And secondly, Councillor Bridgman did mention about the open events. Do you have answers to either of those two that might be useful to the committee, please?
I think with respect to the building structure, I'm not the expert on that. That's where we have to consult with our experts and UKHSA. If we had more of the information in advance, we might have been able to give you a more concrete answer. So I'm afraid I'm having to go with what our specialist said at that time, based on the wording of the application of a prefabricated cafe building. Sorry, I've just missed the second part of your question there.
Yeah, it's Councillor Bridgman's comment about people in open space for the events in Burfield.
Yep. With a lot of these, when the DPZ changed, because there was a significant change in the detailed emergency planning zone in 2020 was when it came into place. As a result of that, there's a lot of buildings, events, what am I trying to say? The commercial units that don't have emergency plans in place, that if they came forward now, we would be requesting that they would have emergency plans in place. We certainly look at events from a safety advisory group point of view, and if these events came through through that route, there would be comments that would also be made about what they should be doing and what they should have in place. So anything new coming forward, we obviously have to look at a different light now, because we've got this detailed emergency planning zone and the requirement on the council to assure the regulators. So it's a little bit of, we can't fix the past altogether, but we are encouraged to try and make sure that people that have actually going forward, we do have protection in place.
Thank you, Chairman.
Before I go on to the next question, sorry, Alice, you wanted to add something?
Just in regards to the events, obviously the events that are happening there, they would be using their PD rights under the sort of temporary use, which is 28 days. So that's restricted, but also the sports pavilion itself has conditions on which state that the building hereby approved shall be used solely for the purposes ancillary to the use of the recreation ground. And this also limits the type of events that can happen there, in the sense that they would have to be ancillary to the existing recreational use. So just wanted to add that.
Right. Thank you very much. I will allow other people to come back with second questions after I've gone through the first round, since Councillor Law is making noises. Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. A few points really for clarity, and sorry, Carolyn, back to you again. I mean, the obvious situation for me comes around how we sit with caravans, park homes, which are in the area, not commercial, granted, but very much modular. And from what I've seen of the proposal here, not necessarily as airtight stroke contained. Just your views on that, Karen, please. And noting that you said we can't fix the past, but these things have all got a shelf life, and at some point those are people's homes that will need to be upgraded, replaced.
And if any new application came in for caravans and mobile homes and the likes, the advice from the UK HSA is advise against.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. And Alice, a few points to you, please, if I may. 6.24 of the application this evening, there's a comment regarding licensing, and there's been a few comments regarding licensing going backwards and forwards, including pop-up pubs in the current pavilion. I should have asked the parish council at the start, so apologies for not doing that, but are you aware of any applications at the moment that might be relevant to this proposal for licensing?
I'm not aware of any license applications at the moment, and they would be viewed on their merits in line with the licensing legal framework.
Indeed, I'm just aware that sometimes people do it in reverse and will go for licensing long in advance of actually going for a planning application. So you're not aware of anything, that's fine. I'm not holding you to it. I'm just interested to know, because I think there's a big difference between a pop-up pub taking place every now and again and something like this on a much more longer term basis. On that point, on the point of temporary and it being 5 years, is that a standard that you would expect?
5 years is really at the upper limit of what I would expect, and if if, like I said, if I was to be overturned, members could reduce that time.
Okay, thank you. That's useful information. And the final part for me, and it comes back to other comments around parking restrictions and height barriers. My parish council has a height barrier. They also have a key for it. Are you in the know as to what sort of height barrier is in place on this site?
I couldn't tell you the actual height of the height barrier, but on my site visit, I did see it open, and a vehicle that was higher than the barrier did drive through. So I know that there is a key for it and vehicles can get through, but I'm sure the parish here could also comment on that. But that is, I did actually witness them opening the height barrier. So
that's really helpful. Thank you.
Is that it, Councillor Sumner? Yeah. Unfortunately, we can't ask the parish council because they've already spoken, but don't worry. Councillor Mays.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Again, for Caroline. Caroline, if the people in the pop-up cafe were having a picnic on the green outside, they would not be covered by the DPZ's rules. I don't really see the difference between having a meal in a cafe on a site where there are many, many other people in the area. And what provision have you got within the West Berkshire system for accommodating the people on the fairground and in the cafe if there were an incident declared by the AWE Burfield?
Okay. I'm trying to focus on this application because this is what we're trying to do. So if it was, if the pop-up pub was operating, I would expect that they would be able to go inside one of the buildings that is actually there, but the existing building that's actually there. That's where I would be expecting them. If they're actually being considerate of in what they're actually doing, then should there would be an incident, then they should be going into a building. The problem with this particular building is the size of it, in a sense that it's 79 square meters and 24 people is what the covers now, except that there could be less there at any one time or otherwise. But it's 79 square meters. When you take into account all the furniture, et cetera, that's not an awful lot of room to be, if they were going to be going undercover, and indeed potentially attracting other people to go undercover to shelter from a radiation emergency. So that's not really answering necessarily your question about people that are outside there at the moment. As I said, so we're focusing in on the application that we've got at the moment and the situation with this application. With respect to the DPZ, if an emergency happened with some of those events that are going on, we would have to evacuate all of those people, or potentially evacuate them, because it depends on the situation, but potentially have to evacuate all these people, and they would be moved to the reception centres and or rest centres, depending on the situation. So there'd be a full evacuation would be necessary to move them if that was required. I mean, there's lots of ifs in here because I can't say it depends on the science at the time, but that's what we would be doing. We'd be moving them to evacuation and rest centres.
Are you happy with that answer, Councillor Mays? Whether you're happy or not, do you have any other questions? Right, okay, wrong terminology. Councillor Law, you seem to have a moment there where you thought of another question.
Yes, it was something that Alice said, to mention that the use had to be ancillary to the use of the recreation ground. So I'm just wondering if you could define ancillary to me. Let me give you two examples. We know Mr. McKinnon lives not very far from this place. So, and we know that there's the parish councils, a lot of people working from home still. So if nipping around at 10:30 in the morning for a coffee and a donut, is that ancillary to the recreation ground? And then if he and Mrs. McKinnon decide maybe after about 8:30 at night to go out and meet up with some friends and have a beer. Is that ancillary to the recreation ground? I'm confused. Please help me.
What is ancillary, Alice?
So there is no legal definition for ancillary, but we normally take it to mean that generally anything you would do as a person that you could normally do within that normal use. And the recreation ground, obviously recreation, there are a lot of uses associated with that, but it is a sports pavilion, so you'd normally sort of expect it to be ancillary to the sort of sport that happens on the recreation ground. But you know, I don't know the ins and outs of these temporary events. I can only say sort of what the condition says, but the definition of ancillary is anything you generally do as a person that you could normally do within that existing use as it is. So sorry, that's about as
Chairman, Alice mentioned temporary events. I don't think I'm dealing with temporary events. I mean, Mr. McKinnon was well known to have a beer nearly every night. So if he was to go around with his wife, you know, and have a beer, you know, he's not. There's no football going on. He's not watching it. He doesn't take the dog out for a walk around the ground.
They're not selling beer.
Is that ancillary?
The cafe is selling beer.
The cafe is selling beer.
No, it's not.
I understood it was going to be selling beer.
Right. Alice, could you just please clarify potentially hours of proposed operation, which I think might be of assistance to council law, and whether beer would be available should it be granted permission or not?
So the temporary cafe, if alcohol was to be served, they'd need to get a license, and that's under a separate framework different to planning. The condition I spoke about earlier was only in relation to the existing sports pavilion and is not related to this application at this current time.
And could you clarify or confirm, please, the hours of proposed operation?
Yes, Chairman, I just have them here. So we proposed two different conditions, one for customer opening hours, which was Monday to Friday, 8 till 6, Saturdays, Saturdays is 8 till 6, Sundays and bank holiday 9 till 2. Deliveries are slightly different because we didn't want it to clash with the traffic from the Willink School. So Monday to Fridays 9:30 to 2, and Saturday 10 till 2, and Sunday 10 till 1.
I just felt it was prudent to advise council law that Councillor McKinnon or anyone else would have to go for their beverages, or alcoholic or not, elsewhere after 6 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah,
should this be granted?
I take the point, and I don't wish to belabor this.
No,
I used probably inadvertently a bad example of beer.
I think you did.
But the cup of coffee and the donut still applies.
It does. Right. Are there any other questions to officers before I ask who's going to be brave enough to start the debate?
General Manager.
Mehdi, would you please assist us with any before we enter debate?
Yeah. Is this working? Fantastic. I'll just go back to the earlier question over ancillary and the definition, which I believe is captured under the Planning Act of 2016 and Sustainable Planning Act 2009 and the Integrated Planning Act of 97, which defines ancillary. I know it's not of any particular relevance here, but I'll outline it. It includes an ancillary use for the premise, a use which is narrowly interpreted to mean incidental to and necessarily associated with a high threshold of a use. Previous case law established ancillary as being one which is subordinate to the principal use of the premise, meaning that it must serve the purpose for the primary use and usually of a smaller size and scale to the primary use, but does not necessarily have to be small. The dominant use determines the character of the planning use as a whole in accordance to the Town and Country Planning Use Class Order 87 as amended. And generally, that's the definition in that regard. There are a few other things that I can comment on if you'd like me to.
It would assist us, I think, at this stage before we end the debate, which we're about to do.
Comment earlier made by Councillor Law in relation to changes to the structural foundation captured under section 55 that would be classified as development. I would inform members that a planning application would need to be made in that regard because it's operational works which requires a builder's intervention. So that would be a separate planning application in its own right. To a degree, yes, it does alter the description of development. So that would also be another underlying factor. One of the key things that I wanted to draw members' attention to is paragraph 6.47 of the report, which I know Alice did mention earlier about this application, and the Office for Nuclear Regulations making the suggestion that they call the application into the Secretary of State under Section 77 of the Town and Country Planning Act, 21 days, and that we should be advised that prior to forming an actual grant of permission, they be given the opportunity to formally consider the application. I've had a look at the provisions laid before them, which I think is covered under the Schedule 4, subsection F of the MPO 2015. There's a consultation direction out there under the Town and Country Planning Act under subsection 5, subsection 1B, which is the consultation direction of 2021. This gives provisions for an application to be considered by the Secretary of State, which also follows suit with the National Planning Practice Guidance Notes for planning practitioners under Para 28, which also prescribes that when considering the merits of an application, we should give certain direction or certain weight to the Town and Country Planning Consultations Direction of 2021. So in the MPPG, the direction to consult is re-emphasized in there. So I believe the Secretary of State would technically exercise his powers under Articles 18, subsection 4, Articles 31, subsection 1, and Articles 45 of the Town and Country Plan, the MPO. Sorry if I'm being a bit technical here, but I just thought I'd outline the legal provisions for the Secretary of State to review this application.
So in a nutshell, ignoring various subsections and other bits and pieces, if members were minded to grant permission, this would be referred to the Secretary of State for the ultimate decision. They would have up to 21 days to make that decision before we could issue the notice. Is that in a nutshell what you were saying?
I believe it's already been referred to the Secretary of State. So we would technically hold fire before issuing any decisions if members were minded to approve. Having said that, by the time the minutes come out and whatnot, I would suspect it would take beyond 21 days. And if there is considerable doubt or objection continued by them, then it would be a further opportunity to call the application back in.
I think that's clearer. Thank you, Mehdi. Right, members, who's going to start the debate? Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to all who've spoken in this application so far. It seems to me that what we have here is an example of what is undoubtedly a well-meaning regulation, but being applied in such a blanket way that the regulation might seem to begin to fail the communities affected by it. We've heard Carolyn's answers to many questions tonight, and her hands are tied by the regulations that she's working with, and she's acting quite properly in the advice that she's giving, even although some of the answers don't seem to get to the nub of what the members are asking. But we're in that situation, really. And if exceptions to to regulations or if exceptions to statutory consultees weren't possible, then we wouldn't be here. It's for this committee to decide on balance whether going against that recommendation is justified in the circumstances. I mean, overall, really, it does seem to me that given that the customers of the cafe are likely to be those who would already be present in the vicinity to a large extent. You get your walkers, dog walkers, families at the playground, even me going around for a coffee and a donut, councillor, although I'd probably be going for a walk anyway. The lack of protection afforded by a temporary structure, even if we accept that it's not as good as a permanent structure, which, and we've heard some doubts tonight about it from the applicant, but even if you were to accept that, it's better than nothing at all, which is what you have at the moment when you've got lots of people on that site in the open air. And we've already heard from various people with events with literally thousands on that recreation ground. If we were to go along with officers' recommendations tonight, I think the community affected would be justifiably scratching their heads at that decision, given what I've just talked about in terms of the overall usage of that site. We're able to accommodate football matches, we're able to accommodate beer festivals, pop-up events. A small cafe really shouldn't pose too much of a problem. It may well be that the ONR has got this wrong. And I do note Medi's comments earlier, I'd spotted it myself, that if we do approve the application, this will go to the ONR again to consider whether to call it into the Secretary of State. And they may well wish to reconsider, I don't know. I think overall, I'm leaning very much towards the benefits to the community, as explained by many speakers already, would far outweigh what must be a minuscule risk in the event of an emergency at AWE. I know other objections exist. The toilet facilities in the cafe for 48 hours, I get the point that's being made, but I think the importance of the number of the toilets is that it's not zero. And 24 people, one toilet, it might be a bit unpleasant, but I guess in the event of a nuclear emergency, you've got different priorities, and I guess people would just have to muddle through. I don't find that argument particularly persuasive. Other objections do exist, of course, on parking, although our highways officers have made no objections on parking or traffic grounds. So I think I don't say this lightly, because you've got a recommendation on nuclear regulation grounds, and sort of going against that seems like a bit of a heavy thing to do. But I think in this case, it may well be justified.
Councillor Somner, what do you say?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think I agree with what Councillor McKinnon's aiming at on this one. I mean, I note consultee responses that look for definition or example of management of an inside seating area of 24 covers. If we're going to start going into the details and everybody's got to do that, then we might as well start shutting up shop, because there are a lot of the area that are absolutely critical to the people that live in our area and people that visit. I think not too far from us, there's a proposal, or there's this work starting on a cafe in a park. It is becoming a common occurrence. And I think one of the things that I've often said recently is about people getting out and about throughout lockdown, throughout the pandemic, about relying on public rights of way and our green spaces, which are fantastic in West Berkshire, let's be quite clear. As far as I'm concerned, things like this add to those areas. This, for me, is difficult, but Caroline quite rightly said it earlier in one of her responses. It's ifs. It's all based on ifs. If Aldermaston was to go up in smoke, well, what's your priority list going to be? Rethought fairly quickly, I would suggest. This is, I can absolutely see what the parish is trying to deliver here. And I don't take, as Councillor McKinnon has just said, you don't take the sort of consultation from the ONR lightly. But I think we have to be realistic in what residents want, what residents need, and what we can do to support that. And I am leaning towards, I think, a proposal which goes against the suggested refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not going to forget the 5 staff as well on top of the customers, because obviously they need to use the loo as well. But I agree with Councillor McKinnon and Councillor Sumner. And knowing the area reasonably well, in Burfield, you know, it is quite a vibrant community. We've got two communities down the hill, and where it is at the Common. And these cafes or pop-ups are very popular, and it's very useful for people to meet, you know, and not everybody wants to drive everywhere for occasional, just having a coffee during the day. As far as licensing is concerned, that's totally separate from planning to the 2003 Licensing Act, which I've been involved with on licensing on this council since 2003. So that's a total different criteria as such, whether it's for permanent sale or whatever, or temporary sale or 10 notices or whatever. And my view is to support a recommendation, a suitable recommendation in words, but I'm going to think how to say it correctly in words, because it's at the moment for a proposal, Chairman, because it needs to, it could potentially go to the Secretary of State over the 21 days for the temporary call-in or the Office of Nuclear Regulation. So I can't actually think of the words at the moment. Maybe somebody can assist on that proposal.
We'll let you dwell on that. Councillor Law.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm taking slightly, I think I'm going to arrive at the same point as my colleagues. I'm taking a different route. I must say, when I read this report, and I came into the meeting having read it, tending towards, none of us here are experts on the nuclear regulations and all the details. In fact, none of us are real experts in a lot of planning policy either. We always rely on the advice of the officers. We sometimes push back and get it clarified, sometimes to our satisfaction, sometimes to not our satisfaction. So I was thinking to myself, I'm getting advice from a very respected officer, Caroline Richardson, who has gone through this and is advising us with the best of intentions. I got to say, as a layman, if I was a layman here looking at it, it's a bit confusing, doesn't make too much sense to me, but the specialists are recommending it. So I was actually tending to go along with officers' recommendation and leave it up to the applicants to challenge through an appeal. And I thought that was possibly the best way to resolve that. But now I'm hearing, that was before I heard, and it's interesting how the committee meeting can change your opinion a little bit. Now I'm hearing, of course, that it's going to be called in anyhow. So we're going to get a second review of the whole thing. So if we were to approve it, we'll get a second review. And if I was to go down my original route of supporting officers, I'm leaving it for the applicant to appeal. So it's, I think I'm getting there in the same direction as the rest. So I'm interested in what Councillor Linden's proposal was.
Well, in that there are no other hands wishing to add to the debate, could I have a proposal, please? Councillor McKinnon.
Well, I think we just need a proposal on the lines of that we approve the application. We don't need to do anything else, do we?
Members, may I take legal advice on that?
You don't, but I'd like to talk about conditions. If you've got any thoughts on conditions, I think Alice has probably got some ideas, but members.
Happy to hear suggestions.
Maybe, okay.
Alice.
Chairman, I have as well, actually.
Well, all right, I'll come back to you, Councillor Law, but Alice, can you give us a potential list of conditions if members were minded to approve?
I'll run through the titles. If you want me to expand, then please let me know. So obviously, commencement of development, approved plans, temporary planning permission, brackets restoration. So that's the one where they have to put the land back to normal after the 5 years, if members want it to be 5 years. A pre-commencement on schedule of materials, a condition requiring CCTV, AWE emergency plan condition, the permitted uses within Class E, so that'd be taking away the PD rights to make sure that this stays within the Pacific class of, I believe it's Class E B. Customer opening hours, delivery hours, hard landscaping and soft landscaping condition, sustainable drainage measures, a construction method statement, which is sort of more of a highways condition, and the ecologist has asked for a construction environmental management plan while the construction was going on. Those would be my suggested conditions.
And Councillor Law, I'll come to you. If you could add to that list, I'll be very impressed.
I'd like to refine one item on the list. I refer to the officer's report, 6.7 and 6.8, because you're basically saying here, the cladding being metal, it's not particularly attractive. And you then go on to say concerns with regard to materials being used could be overcome by the use of a pre-commencement condition. And previously you've said it's considered an alternative cladding such as timber would make the building more appealing. I got to say, when I've looked at the plans, it looked like, it looked like a container with windows. It is metal. I didn't like it. So can I suggest, I'd be very happy to second the proposal if we had a condition that it was clad in timber.
Right, Councillor McKinnon, you're the proposer. You've had the list from our planning officer, plus an additional one from Councillor Law about the cladding. What do you say?
Yeah, so we can't just say we approve the application then, Alice. there's a few more.
I don't think so.
Listening to those conditions that Alice you went through, I think I'm happy to include those in my proposal. So to approve the application subject to those conditions that you've mentioned. As regards to the councillor laws, I didn't mention this. I'd made some notes during the debate, but my one concern was that it did look a bit ugly. So I'm perfectly happy to include the timber cladding condition as well.
Okay, Councillor Law, does that meet your requirements to second?
It does. I'm happy to second.
Right. Before I go to the vote. Sorry, just before I go to the vote.
I was just going to say that the schedule of materials condition, I don't know if we should go as far to, it might be a bit restrictive to go straight for timber, but the reason it's pre-commencement is then the details would come to officers and we'd be able to view it against policy CS14 and CS19 and make sure the best ones were used. I think.
I'm sorry, Chairman. But when the officers themselves write down cladding such as timber would make the building more appealing, which is where I got my hint from, and I would agree with that. I don't want to back out of that.
Right, I have other hands have gone up, but please, gentlemen, could you please keep it to new points, not being cheeky. Councillor Linden.
Yes, Chairman. It's obviously building control vis-a-vis the cladding in terms of timber. It's just fire safety I'm concerned about. So I'll just leave that for Alice to deal with.
Councillor Somner, then Mehdi, I'll let you just mop up any other comments that I'm keen to go to the vote in that I have a proposal which has been seconded. Councillor Somner.
Yeah, same point, I'm afraid, but a slight variant on it in the original statements that were being made by the architect. I think he mentioned the difference between this and what we consider as a prefab and the current modular buildings is a brick outer. And actually, if it wasn't clad in, if I haven't heard, other than that statement, I haven't heard brick considered. But I think that's where using officers' determination on what the best thing is will come to its fore, taking into account absolutely the fact that you were along the lines of what was mentioned in the documentation. But I think if that could be considered, if that was one of those things, then again, it might change everything completely. And it may even address some of the ONR issues.
Right. I think the thing I'm against is the metal. So I'm quite happy to leave it to the officers, provided it ain't metal.
Right, Councillor Lawley, I think we understand your point. Mehdi, can you just guide us as to how potentially, not knowing which way the vote is going to go, but I do have a proposal which you've heard, which has been seconded. Could you comment specifically about the cladding, please, and anything else that you wish to add? Because I then want to go to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. I believe what Councillor Law was after was a prescribed condition. It can be done, but then obviously hearing discussions moving on to a pre-commencement condition. I we could do both. I would suspect it's probably easier for officers to gauge the design given the pre-commencement, as we would then have the palette of materials and or its visual appearance put before us. So it would probably be better to have a pre-commencement condition as opposed to a prescribed condition. We'll have and also we would obviously lead out to the conservation area design officer, who can then also comment on what their opinion is, as opposed to just officers' view on that.
Okay, could I add at this point then that I'm sure that officers have heard loud and clear that we're not really in favour of metal, and if there is a possibility, certainly if the parish council, the applicant, is also listening intently, I'm sure lots of things are possible. And could there not be an informative MEDI?
Sorry, Chair, an informative on outlining the materials to not be material.
Yes.
We can put an informative.
A no metal informative.
A natural material informative.
We can, of course, outline that preference would be not to be metal. There is one more thing that I will add that hasn't been mentioned, is part of the reason for the design and the use of the materials. I was led to believe through this meeting that it was on the financial grounds or the potential viability of this application. So the only thing I will say in response to that is that we haven't had a viability assessment or a feasibility assessment carried out. If we are to be challenged on that later on, then that would need to be provided. But I think we stand in good stead to put the request in for the materials as is.
Okay, are you happy with that, Councillor Law and Councillor McKenna?
You know, I'm not entirely, but I'm not sure. Have we agreed an informative?
One's just been suggested, so if I made my proposal to include that informative.
Okay.
Yeah, Alice is nodding vigorously.
Thank you. I think actually, I'm sorry to go harp on about that, because I do think the DPZ is a much bigger issue.
It is.
But
I think officers get the gist of what we're saying.
If it's going to get through this one, let's have something that we can look at.
Design and therefore materials, in my humble opinion, are material planning consideration as well. I think it's absolutely right to raise this. So members, you have a proposal which I don't think we need reiterating, do we? So it is for condition which will, of course, go to the ONPR and potentially Secretary of State anyway. Those in favour of granting our conditional permission at this stage, please show. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. That is unanimous. Right, thank you, everyone. Members, are you happy to crack on and straight on to the next item? 5 minutes? 3 minutes. I'll let you have 3 minutes. Councillor Linden, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Good. Right, members, after that brief intermission, we turn to item 2, which is a conversion and extension of an existing outbuilding to form a single dwelling at Short Heath House, Short Heath Lane, Solomstead. The same procedure as before. We have people only in the room who will speak. You must understand the procedure by now. I will be guided. I will help you by guiding you with timings. Matt Shepherd, you're the officer. Please will you introduce the item?
Thank you, Chairman. So the application 22/01062 FULD is for the conversion and extension of an existing outbuilding to form a single dwelling at Short Heath House. The application, the recommendation from officers is to delegate to the Service Director, Development and Regulation to refuse planning permissions for the reasons listed within the application documents. The reason for the application to come to committee is it's been called to planning committee by Councillor Ross McKinnon if officers are likely to recommend refusal. I'm just going to share my screen and take you through the presentation. Excellent. So I show you here to start with is the location plan. So the red line for the application site is where the dwelling will be. So you can see the outbuilding in the centre of the plan. The blue line denotes land in ownership by the applicant. Here we show you the block plan. So you can see here where the curtilage of the dwelling is proposed. So this is the grey outlined around. So you can see Shore Heath House, and you can see the proposed converted barn in the grounds within the red line. Moving on, this is the existing elevations of the barn as seen on the site visit, just for reference. Again, here showing the ground floor plans of the stables. The proposed development includes extensions in terms of raising the ridgeline by 0.8 metres in height, adding this further gable-ended section on the building and adding a sunroom the length, infilling in between the two gables. Moving just to the images to show you from the site visit, just to refresh your memory in terms of the elevations. So here we can see the frontage of the barn, the side elevation. So on this image, you can see the bricks that outline the extent of that extension to the side, and that will obviously go up into a gable-ended kind of two-storey element. Again, a bit more detail, this is where the sunroom would run along from on the front elevation. The boundary treatments to the side elevations just to show the relationship to the rest of the site. And then the relationship here is shown between the proposed dwelling and the existing dwelling on site. So you can see the separation distances and also the TPO trees on the site. Again, just show you on this image, this is the curtilage of the surrounding area for a bit of reference. And here we see the side elevation of the barn, again, just showing the extent of that extension to the front of the proposed dwelling. So here we see the rear elevation and the TPO tree, and our councillors performing quite a thorough site visit, going up the ladder there. So if I come away from that, stop sharing my screen. So the application should be noted within the planning history, within the application, within the report, application 20/00413, which has been approved for the conversion of the existing outbuilding to form a single dwelling, including the provision of off-road street parking. So the application has got permission, the site has got permission for a single dwelling conversion of this barn. In terms of responses from the statutory consultees, our tree officer raised no objections subject to conditions. The lead local flood authority has no concern in terms of flooding. No objections has been raised by our highways officers. No public representations have been received to the application. Moving to the crux of the issue, the principle of development. So under policy C1 provides a presumption against new residential development outside of settlement boundaries. There is exceptions to this, one being the conversion of redundant buildings. In point 5.4 of the officer's report shows you the criteria of C4, which lists each section that needs to be satisfied to enable conversion of a redundant building in the countryside. Section of this criteria involves proposals involving a building that is structurally sound, capable of conversion without substantial rebuilding, extension or alteration. The building is generally redundant. The residential use would give a satisfactory level of amenity for occupants, has no effect on the adverse impact on the rural character. Creation of residential curtilage would not be visually intrusive or harmful. The conversion retains the character, fabric and historic interest of the building, and the impact of any protected species is assessed and measured to proposed to mitigate such impacts. The proposed development includes raising the ridge height by approximately 0.8 metres in height. The case officer considers this to conflict with the first section of policy C4 as a substantial alteration to the original building. Just to note, in section 5.7, there should be there's a typo there. It's therefore the case officer cannot agree that the building can be converted without substantial alteration. Moving forward, the two-storey extension to the south of the barn is approximately 5 metres deep from the original barn elevation, gable-ended, pitched roof, and would extend for 5.7 metres and would have a ridgeline of 6.8 metres. Again, case officers consider this to be a substantial alteration and extension. There'll be a 2 metre wide sunroom lobby running across the southern elevation of the development. Again, another extension. Combining all these elements of extension, the case officer is concerned there is conflict with the first section of policy C4. Moving to that, there is through these changes and substantial alterations, including the glazing elements seen on the elevations, the officers is concerned that there's cumulative impact of each of these extensions and changes loses the rural nature of the existing barn, and these changes are considered to have an adverse impact on the rural character of the existing building. Furthermore, in point 5.14, case officers are concerned that the impact of protected species has not been assessed and measured, and proposed mitigation has not been included. Previous application 24/00413 approved the application was accompanied by a preliminary ecological report and BAT surveys. This recommended BAT surveys be updated post summer of 2021. These have not been included within this application, and therefore case officers cannot determine, there is insufficient information to determine whether protected species are mitigated and accompanied. In terms of neighbouring amenity, highways, flooding and drainage, officers raised no objections, and we've covered across in terms of ecology and trees of the site. Tree officer happy in terms of impact to TPO trees subject to conditions. The case officer therefore recommends that the development be refused in regards to the principle of development C4, in regards to there being substantial alteration and extension to the development, but also a lack of information in regards to ecology and protected species. Moving to the update sheet, just to show you, our ecologist has provided a few more paragraphs and a bit more information from the previous ecology reports, saying that the field survey was undertaken in 2018 and the BAT emergent surveys were carried out in 2019. So again, we can see why that if works were post summer of 2021, there would be a need to update them. Council of Ecologists has advised that ecology reports cannot be conditioned. Officers noted that Central Government Guidance Circular 0605 Biodiversity notes it's essential that the presence of or otherwise of protected species and the extent that they may be affected by the proposed development is established before the planning permission is granted. Otherwise, all relevant material considerations may not have been addressed in making the decision. In case there's any further doubt, the need to ensure ecological surveys are carried out should therefore only be left to the coverage under planning conditions in exceptional circumstances. One example of these circumstances would be a phased development, a large 100, 200 dwelling site, which may take a few years to build out, would require several or updates. Therefore, officers are not recommending a condition to resolve the ecological refusal reason. As requested at the site visit, we've included policy ENB 20, but it should be noted that the decision should not be made on ENB 20 as it's an old policy that's been replaced by policy C4. We also update in terms of the refusal reason, principle of development C4 character of the area. Officers would like to add in the SPD for quality design and house extensions into the reason for refusal under the reasoning of the policy. That is all, Chairman. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you, Matt. We have no parish council representative, no objectors. We do have two supporters, Lucy and Keith Chopping. Right, can I just pause you for a moment? Sorry, I've just been asked something which I'm not to. Oh, Councillor Jeffrey, you're looking at a different screen. Could you just move your camera? We can't see you, as I'm sure you can see from the screen. Does that make sense? Someone. Yes, that's the one. Yes, that's wonderful. Right. Good evening, ex-councillor Chopping and daughter. You know the score. Can I assist with any timekeeping?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
What, half time?
Just give us, yeah.
Yeah, minute to go.
Minute to go. Right, we'll do a minute to go. But please remain there for any questions.
Right, Chairman, members, there is already, I must emphasise that there is already an existing approval on this building to turn it into a residence. That was granted in 2020, but the permitted development rights were removed. This application is to improve the living quality of the building, and that's why we're before you this evening. There have been absolutely no objections whatsoever to this application locally. I should tell you that the owners of the building are myself and my wife, and the occupant of the building will be my daughter, Lucy here, Mrs. Jones, who will live in it with her family. So over to you, Lucy.
I just wanted to give you a little bit of background as to why we've done this. Just over 3 years ago, I had a conversation with my parents about an idea I had to convert their stables into a home for myself and my family. This would enable my parents to stay in their house for longer without the need to downsize. I could be available to help them maintain the home that they've worked hard for and they've lived in for the last 33 years. With the help of my brothers, we received permission for the conversion, and then COVID hit. All of our plans had to go on hold. During the past 2.5 years, both of my parents have ended up in hospital. My mum's mobility has decreased so much that she relies on a wheelchair. I've helped them as much as possible with daily visits, but our end goal is to be there permanently. This now brings me on to our latest application that we're discussing here today. Since COVID, our lives have changed. Myself and my husband have been lucky enough to still be in full-time employment, but as with lots of companies, there have been changes. My husband now works from home permanently, and I've been offered a new job where I'll be working from home part-time. The original application was for 3 bedrooms, 2 on the ground floor with a kitchen diner, and 1 upstairs with a living room. We submitted the new application adding in an office on the ground floor with the living room downstairs and moving the 3 bedrooms upstairs, hence raising the roof slightly, just to make it a bit more comfortable. So we need the extension that you see on the plans today. You can also see that we've replicated the gable end as well. We've tried to be as sympathetic as possible to the existing building. We want it to look exactly as it is. We also want to make the house more eco-friendly. We want to add in some solar panels and a heat pump. And we've connected the two gable ends with the glass windows that we are hoping will house the solar panels without putting them in the roof. And the glass will give us some extra insulation. So basically, I am asking you on behalf of my family and my parents to please let us proceed with this. If there are conditions, so be it. But we really need to do this, and we need to do this soon for the sake of my family. So I'm just asking you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy.
Right, thank you. Sorry, you've got a minute to go.
I'm going to carry on now.
Oh, go on.
Yes, the officers' main objections were there were under 4 headings. That is, the roof has been raised, the glass to the front, the extension itself, and something to do with bats. 2 brown-eared long bats, long-eared brown bats. The roof of that building, as those who came to the site visit will have noticed, the roof to that building is reaching the end of its useful life. The stone-walled concrete tile slates on it are coming to an end of their life. So we've got to redo the roof anyhow. So we thought we've got to strip it all off. We thought that it was give us an opportunity to raise the roof 800 mil to make it more livable inside. Those who came to the site visit will have popped up and had a look at the roof, and they will have seen that to raise that ceiling up in there will make it much more environmentally friendly. The glass to the front, which the officer seems to be concerned about, is actually a very clever way of insulating the building.
I'm going to have to ask you to make your conclusions.
Oh, I thought we're going to be told about that.
Well, I did when you started talking. I said you had a minute.
All right. Well,
so if you could make your conclusions briefly, and I'll ask if members have any questions.
I will. Just very quickly. Glass along the front is insulation. Is a very clever form of insulation. The extension itself just covers the area of the hard standing of the existing building, the existing stables. So there's nothing new there really. And as regards bats,
I'm going to have to stop you. I've let you go over 30 seconds. But I'm sorry. You remember, I'm sure, when you were sitting here, we have to comply with the rules. Now, members, do you have any questions, please? Councillor Jeffrey.
Councillor Jeffrey, yeah. Ask me about the bats.
Can you tell us what you do think is going to happen with bats, bearing in mind that the previous approval or the previous certificate about the bats has now expired? Does that question make sense?
What, we're going to get a new survey? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yes. So we've been told by Natural England that they're happy to renew our licence, subject to a new survey. They think everything's perfectly straightforward.
Thank you.
May I come in here? But we are.
You can indeed both answer. Yes, absolutely. Right. Now your time is up.
We were quite prepared to agree to a condition to provide this license because we know it's possible to obtain it. So a condition, if you saw fit to approve us this evening, but a condition making sure that we had a proper bat license, that would be fine by us. But I'm rather startled to learn that you can't condition. The ecology officer has reported that you can't condition a bat license, or you can't condition anything to do with the bats. So, that was complete news to us this evening.
Right, Councillor Mays.
Speaker. Good evening. 2 problems, I think, that can easily be overcome. The raising of the roof, Keith and Lucy, yeah, sorry. You're going to retain the roof slope as the same, is that correct?
Yes,
in the drawings, it looks the same.
Exactly.
I couldn't see any difference.
It will look precisely
so
the
you're
same.
going to raise the whole roof,
from the
just
base.
that bit higher.
in height in the walls, and then go up at the same angles.
Yeah.
Keeping the same, well, you're going to have to replace the barn overhang at the end on the eastern end of the building, the actual, what would normally be under a winch.
Oh, yes.
The overhang
Yeah, that's
roof.
going to go actually.
Yeah, fine. It's going to need removing all the existing roof timbering.
Yes,
looks pretty solid there.
It's all got to come off.
Are you going to use the same again? Same timbers?
Whatever you like.
Oh, it's not bad.
I haven't spoken to anyone yet.
There's a choice to be made, to be honest.
It's heavy timber.
Do you use what?
It's heavy timber you've
Like
got
to
there.
reuse it. Like to use it again.
What, the existing timbers?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yes. I thought you were talking about the roof coverings.
No, I'm talking about the actual rafters and the purlins.
Yes.
We'd like to reuse it, retain some of the character.
Yeah, fine. Well, okay. As far as I'm concerned, that's okay. But you also said you were going to replace the concrete tiles with
concrete slates. They are
at the moment. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
But you're going to replace that with ordinary clay tiles.
Well, as I say, there's a choice to be made there because concrete slates don't cost as much as plain clay tiles.
I realise that.
So when it comes to the budget, we may have to make a decision. But the concrete slates have done their job very well over the last 30 odd years.
Yeah.
So perhaps we'll simply reuse those.
Okay.
But it would be nice to have plain tiles on it. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, that's fine.
But
Thank you very
about
much.
3 times as expensive.
Thank you.
Well, are there any other questions, please? Right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And we have the agent, John Cornwell. I'm going to be strict on you with timing as well. I'm strict with everybody.
I'm sure you are.
But so can I assist you with timekeeping?
Yes, a minute.
A minute to go. I promise I will shout it out loud.
Thank you, Chairman. You've heard the personal details. I'll confine myself to the policy issues because this application stands or falls on how the degree to which it meets the 7 criteria in policy C4. If it meets those, then all of the other policy objections that have been raised fall away. It's the key policy. I don't think the officers would contradict me when I say that. Criterion 1 says the proposal involved a building that is structurally sound and capable of conversion without substantial rebuilding, extension or alteration. The keyword there is substantial. The explanatory text says at paragraph 434, the building should be capable of being converted and accommodated into the existing landscape without significant effects on the rural character of the area, including light pollution and the character of rural highways. It is expected that any building works will be relatively minor and will involve the use of matching materials, relatively again. Now, these proposals, I think I'm right in recalling, deliver something in the order of 35% extension to the existing structure. Now, I spent much of my career in the Metropolitan Greenbelt, which, as you know, is the most restrictive planning policy in the country. Even there, existing dwellings are allowed to increase their original footprint and volume by 50%. So what we're asking for here is not excessive by any means. It's all a matter of degree. Members who went to the site meeting last week will have cannot fail to have noticed that there is no intervisibility between the application site and the outside world. It is wholly, completely contained within a deep vegetation screen. I've lived in that Burfield Common for 36 years. I walk around there regularly, and I can tell you as a matter of fact that spring, summer, winter, autumn or winter, you cannot see buildings inside. Until about 3 years ago, I didn't know that Short Heath House existed in there because you cannot see it. So you say to yourself, in respect of criteria 4 and 5, which are the other 2 criteria that it is said we don't meet. Criteria 4, it has no adverse impact on or does not affect rural character. And 5, the creation of the residential curtilage would not be visually intrusive, have a harmful effect on the rural character of the site or its setting in the wider landscape. Well, it certainly doesn't have any adverse effect on the rural character. As I've said, it cannot be seen at all. I draw a distinction between this site, and it's something that the officer mentions actually. If this site was next to a public highway and it had these extensions on, that would be a very different situation. And yes, you could say that contravenes a policy, but it can't be seen from anywhere. So all I can say is, where's the harm? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Well timed. Members, questions for Mr. Cornwall? We should have let him off lightly, are we? Oh, the council law.
No, I just wished Mr. Cornwall to have a look. He quoted, you're right, he went down the list of the conditions on C4.
Yes.
You quoted the officers as saying subsection 4.
Yes.
I think you misread that. They're not refusing on subsection 4. They're refusing on subsections 1, 6, and 7. I just wanted you to see if that changes any of your opinion.
Well, yeah. Well, six. The building is using matching materials, and I'm sure the applicant will be prepared to put tiles on the clay tiles on the roof. I think that would be much better. The extensions are not that significant. They really aren't. For example, the glazed sun lobby. One of the reasons for that, Councillor Chopping mentioned that it was for insulation. But the other point about that is that because it's fully glazed, it's not covering the existing elevation. And therefore you can see the existing elevation through the glazing. I think that's quite a smart move myself. The proposed extension actually matches an existing extension at the other end of the elevation. So they sort of match each other. And a 2-foot extension to the roof, I don't regard as material with respect. I really don't. So we're all talking matters of opinion and degree here. And it's how you apply the policy.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just say, Chairman, I meant to mention on the bat issue, understood, and I understand that we can't condition it. Of course, if members are happy with the proposal, but they've got to refuse it because there's no bats, then quite clearly we can get a bat survey done. The window for bat surveys is April to the end of September. That can be delivered before the end of September, and we'll resubmit the application under the free go rules.
Oh, I was going to say that I would need to take professional advice as to the way forward with that.
That's the way around it, Chair.
We are where we are with this. We are considering it at this level.
Yep.
So at the appropriate time, I will take professional guidance and advice as to the best legitimate way forward as far as that goes.
Thank you.
So members, are there any other questions for Mr. Cornwall? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
It's ward member time. Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'll limit my comments here to, as I usually do when I'm speaking as a ward member in these applications, to summarising what the views are of the residents nearby on this application. And I'll save more substantive points for later on in the debate. The views of residents in the ward are, there aren't any. There's been no objections, no letters of support other than obviously what we've heard tonight. And I think that's largely down to the fact that, as Mr. Cornwall said, that the site is completely enclosed and not visible really from any public viewpoint. So those are my comments as ward member for the moment, Chairman.
Well, that was nice and brief. Any questions on that brief statement, members? Questions to officers? Any questions to officers, or are we going to go straight? Oh, Councillor McKinnon.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. So I think I am in agreement with Mr. Cornwall that the key thing here is the word substantial and what the definition of substantial is. Now, I was going to ask Matthew, is there a threshold, an increase in footprint or a volume which is laid down to get you to substantial, or is it simply a judgment call?
Matthew.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of, there isn't a percentage required within the policy. Of course, there's supporting details within 4.3734 of the policy that says works will be relatively minor. So it comes down to an opinion on the application. Just to put it relatively, we have a 38% increase in floor area from the original to proposed. In terms of, so we look at applications, we look at the national prescribed space standards. So what is the bare minimum that's accepted as a dwelling? And officers have calculated it's 133% larger than those nationally prescribed space standards. So when we say there is a substantial alteration, that's from a baseline, but we have to take each application in its individual merits. We also have to look at the individual barn in terms of raising the ridgeline might be a substantial alteration in one section, the gable end, other sections on there. So it is a matter for debate of what is considered a substantial alteration.
Councillor McKinney,
just a quick one. You mentioned the 38% increase there. I can't see that in the report. Is there any reason why that didn't make it in? Because that would have been useful.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I take that question?
Please do, Mehdi.
So I was having a look at the report afterwards, and yes, perhaps so. You are right. We should have included footprints and increase in footprints. That's something we'll take away and work on. One thing that hasn't been mentioned in the report is the nationally described space standards of 2015. So for a dwelling house that comprises of 2 stories of a 3-bedroom nature accommodating 6 persons, which is what the floor plans depict here, the nationally described space standard stipulates that the floor area at a minimum should be 102 meters squared. The proposal comes in at 237 meters squared, which is 133% increase over what the nationally described space standards prescribes. So if we look at the previous extant permission, the previous permission, which has established a principle, there was a footprint of 171 meters squared, which comes in at a 70% increase over what the nationally described space standards are. So officers do have to make a judgment. There is no clear definition as to what is substantial, and it would be down to officers to put that out there. Taken into consideration that we obviously have that past permission, which was also accompanied by 2 planning conditions that removed PD rights, and that ranged from classes A to E, and that was intentionally done with the intention to not further exacerbate the scale of the development. So we have to obviously look at the weighing factors from the previous consent, the conditions imposed to prevent further increase, which covered B, which was class B, which was the roofing scale, and alterations, and even extended out to side extensions, front extensions under class A. So at the moment where we stand is we have a previous approval which they can commence, which comes in up and beyond the nationally described space standards, and the proposal as it stands is a significantly large increase of 133% over what is currently advised.
Okay, well, thank you. I will come back to you. I'm interested to hear of space standards as opposed to percentage increases of what they have. It's a new take on things. Councillor McKinnon, please come back.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Just a hypothetical, if the existing building itself was 133% higher than the existing space standards, and the conversion didn't involve any expansion or extension, that would be okay under this policy, wouldn't it?
Under this policy, so not looking at the nationally described space standards is purely there for indicative minimum standards. So if they were to go up and beyond that, then that's.
So the point I'm getting at is that this policy talks about a building that's structurally sound and capable of conversion without substantial rebuilding, extension, or alteration. So if we had a building that was structurally sound that was already that size, never mind the space standards, the conversion of that building to a dwelling would not fall foul of point 1 in policy C4.
If I'll take the answer. In terms of, that's correct. The conversion of the original dwelling original building contained no extension or alterations, and it was above the nationally prescribed space standards.
That's fine. Thanks, Chairman.
I have a raft of hands up now, so all still on questions, but please can we have new questions? I'm sure they will all be. Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to go back to the bat issue again, really, because the first thing I wrote down when I read through the paperwork was condition it until the update report came through this evening when we find out we can't do that. So I suppose my question is, and again, it goes back to the previous and approved application. Would that need to be done anyway for them to progress that application into development?
Well, that's a good one. Who can answer that?
So my understanding of it, Chairman, is that from a planning perspective, they have fulfilled their planning conditions and could implement that 2020 permission. To do so, they would have to achieve a natural England licence, which would require updates to the report. So there would be a catch within that, but it wouldn't be something they come back to a local planning authority to get approval for, is my understanding.
But they would need to go through that process, so they would need to get licensed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Helpful. Thank you, Councillor Law.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've just got a couple of points I'd like the officers to clarify. Indeed, I think some of the issues we got here is this application actually falls between a conversion and a substantial redevelopment. And that was typical of our old ENV 19 and ENV 20. And I'm sure Councillor Chopping will remember, we used to get into all sorts of contortions trying to define what was what and what wasn't. And I think the reason, Metty, why possibly officers haven't gone into looking at space, volume, area comparisons is because that's usually only when we're looking at extensions. And that therefore would fall under policy C6. So my first question to officers is, this report is all to do with C4. Why have we not also looked at C6, which is to do with extensions? I think I know the answer, but I'd like to hear the officer's answer. And the other thing is, if I go back to this list of conditions, the 7 conditions, all of which, by the way, have to be approved, not just, it's not a majority, 5 are okay and 2 aren't. All of them, according to the report, has to be approved. What I don't understand is the wording that the planning consultant made the point of this, and Councillor McKinnon, substantial, but it's substantially, if you read this, it's substantial rebuilding, comma, extension or alteration. So have we missed out substantial extension, or is that deliberately not there? I think this is quite important because I think you're right. This whole thing hinges on substantial and how we interpret it. So
where do you place the comma? Yes.
2 point. Well, I know where the comma's there.
Yeah,
is there a word? Is there a word missed? Is substantial extension missing, or not? So can you help me on that? And why did we not use C6 as well as C4?
Right. Who can answer that? C6 and the importance of a comma, which does alter the sense of a sentence potentially. There's a bit of a conflab going on. Matthew.
Sorry, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Law. In terms of why officers haven't used policy C6, is that policy C6 entitled extension of existing dwellings within the countryside. So it's very clearly stated within the application form the development hasn't started from previous, that it is a stable block, as we saw on the site meeting. So applying policy C6 would have been incorrect because it's not an existing dwelling. If it were converted and an application was submitted in the future, it may be that we'd consider policy C6 as an extension to that existing dwelling. In terms of policy C4, it is as copied there. Officer's interpretation is substantial rebuilding, extension or alteration. The policy just chooses not, it's my interpretation, the policy chooses not to repeat the word substantial rebuilding, substantial extension or alteration. So it's giving that it could be interpreted the other way, that any extension or any rebuilding would be inappropriate. So I've interpreted that as without substantial rebuilding, extension or alteration. Is that okay?
Does that help you, Councillor Law?
Yes, indeed. The answer about it being an existing dwelling. Only extension can apply to existing is what I thought. So, and I think I did have a supplementary, but I think you've already cleared, was if the existing extant conversion went ahead, at some time after that was completed, the applicants could apply for extensions, including raising the roof.
That's correct. And officers would have to treat that on its individual merits in the future if submitted. There may be replications within officers' opinion within this report to that, but we'd have to treat that on its individual merits and not prejudge it.
Thank you.
Well, I had exactly the same thought and would have asked the same question, but you beat me to it, which is fine. Councillor Linden.
Thanks, Chairman. It's Councillor Sumner's point over the bats. So just to clarify that what the officers were saying, it doesn't require a new free application and they would just have to submit the report as part of the legal agreement. Is that correct?
I think you need to rephrase the question. I'm confused, I confess.
Well, I mean, Honourable Alderman Keith Chopping was talking about putting a new free application in vis-a-vis the bats.
Yeah. So in terms of a resubmission within 1 year of a similar application or proposal, can we consider it a free go? So there'd be another submission of an application should this one be determined, and that's, I think, is what the planning agent is referring to.
Thanks, Chairman.
Yeah, indeed. Councillor Mays.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. My question of the officers is basically if they don't raise the roof, the 800 millimetres, is the space in the roof sufficient for human habitation, i.e. the bedrooms with sloping roofs, presumably? Would that be possible? That's already been done, yes, I know, but
so in terms
is
of
there sufficient space?
There was considered, the previous officer obviously considered that in the 2020 application and considered there was sufficient space, headroom to achieve those bedrooms and floor space. It may be that raising the ridgeline provides further floor space, taking the eaves away.
Wouldn't provide more floor space, would it?
So usable yes, floor space. So
it's more in height.
Yeah. So, yeah. But usable floor space that is of a sufficient height for it to be classed as usable.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Thank you.
I'm going to claim chairman's privilege and ask, hopefully, the last question. Can I bottom out in layman's terms where we are with bats? We can't potentially approve this and condition a bat survey. Is that right? I'm going to pick this up in bite-sized pieces. So could we approve this? But sorry, if we were minded to approve this application, we could not condition it subject to a satisfactory bat survey. Is that a correct statement?
It is officers' advice that you should not be conditioning
a bat survey
because you're not taking account of all the issues that could arise. So there is some room for exceptional circumstances,
yeah,
and we'd look for justification for that as reason to the planning condition.
Like a part build of a larger development. Okay, I would have another. No, I'm not going to. I'll stop there. Members.
I'll kick off again, Chairman. Yeah. So I think we've established that really what we're dealing with, if we put the bat issues to one side, and there might be some more discussion on how to proceed with that, if we can get over the other issues. But it seems that the word substantial is the one that's at play here. And in the absence of specific guidelines, as we've suggested, I'm taking the advice on the space standards as read, but we're talking here about what makes a substantial extension. And it's a judgment call as to whether 38% increase is substantial. Also, I think what we need to take into account is the site visit. Those members who attended the site visit would have seen quite helpfully the extension marked out on the ground at the gable ends. and also can observe that the roof height, I think the roof height was nearly 6 meters as it was, and it's being asked to be raised 0.8. Just by eyeballing that, just by having a look at it at the site visit, I struggle to see how that could be considered a substantial extension. But of course, that's a judgment that other members have to consider. The site visit was very helpful in that regard, as I think they usually are. So it does come down to the judgment as to what's substantial. My own judgment, I'm leaning towards, is that it is not substantial for the reasons that I've given.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else wish to add?
Yeah.
Councillor Law.
Thank you. Substantial or not, I'm on the cusp on this one, to be very candid with you. You see, going back to the previous application, and we talked about officers and we're going to take their advice and they're the specialists. And it's very clear there's four reasons that the officers are giving for refusal on this particular thing, on this application. You know, we have the bats, and it's a bit airy, and we're not quite sure how to handle it. And then we've got this debate. I agree. I am genuine. I think I'm on the cusp of this substantiality. But that's just for that's only for subsection 1 of C4. 4. I've then got 6 and 7 to look at. And then we've also got the officers have introduced this design objection that was introduced tonight with the update as well. So I'm actually sitting here thinking, if and I got to say this, if this wasn't a previous member of this council here, I think it would be an easy decision for me. I'd be saying no. I go with officers on refusal. I'm looking at the optics of how this one will look if we were to approve.
Right, I'm looking. Is that a legacy hand, Councillor McKinnon? Yeah, well, Councillor Somner.
Give you a break. Yeah, I understand what Councillor Law's saying there. I'm not so much in that position, but what I am seeing is an applicant that is desperately trying to meet the criteria and falling short of it, as has been listed against the policy. But it does come back down to how material are those variances, I think. And I'm looking at it. I wasn't able to join the site visit, unfortunately. But I do look at it in the wider context of its setting. And I look at some of those things. You talk about the glass frontage. Many places have their end walls kicked out and glass frontage put in these days, especially if they're overlooking rivers and lakes and the like, and it's seen as a wonderful thing to do. This should be seen as a wonderful thing to do for other reasons, by the sound of it, and it's not something that I've come across before in applications, but it's certainly something I think that it would be useful to have more information on for us as an authority generally. And I look to officers to try and get more information for us generally on that one anyway. It isn't easy. I think Councillor Law's absolutely right. It isn't easy, and I'm very much in the similar position. I can absolutely see both sides of the argument. I'm having a debate with myself as to which way this one should go, and taking the opportunity to go back, sort the bats out, and come back again is all very well and good, and it will sort that problem out. That problem needs to be sorted out anyway, even to go on with the previous application as we've established. But that still isn't going to address the things that are going to come back up again. I think my position on the increase is, it goes back to what was established last time. Permitted development removed. Some of those things can't be done even when we've got a change established to the barn into a dwelling. Yeah, this is not easy, And again, with all due respect to the officers and the advice they've given of us, which is considerable, but I'd like to hear what other people think on it as well at the moment, I think.
Well, Councillor Mays has put his hand up, as has Councillor Linden, but I would agree, this isn't easy, notwithstanding the fact that it should be irrelevant that we know the applicant. We are a policy-driven council, and yes, we take account of personal circumstances, and I fully understand personal circumstances and the desire to look after mum and dad and so on. But this isn't an annex, and I don't know how that squares. I genuinely don't know, which is what I will come back to officers on before I ask for a recommendation, because there is a social need here, but there's a policy-driven council. So I'm planting that one ahead of time for you to think about it. I will come to Councillor Mays and Councillor Linden, then come back to the planning officer.
Thank you, Chairman. We've got a problem here in that the property is in the countryside. It's out of the boundary. And in the past, elsewhere, we have always assumed that an annex to a main property was under separate ownership and wasn't saleable in a separate context. Here we have a parent's house with an annex which is now termed to be separate in planning terms. I think it's substantial. Sorry, I think it is a large extension. I don't think it's substantial in terms of the volumes that we've been talking about in the past. We've been in the past, and I'm talking 2011, 2015, we were talking about 50% or 100% on volume and area bulk. And this doesn't appear to be as much as the 100% we've given elsewhere. So I'm inclined to go against the officer's recommendations.
Against, by that you mean you're leaning towards
would give
approval.
permission.
Right, okay. Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's a cusp issue, but this property is not in the area of outstanding natural beauty. And how much proportionate harm is caused by this application? And I can't really see it. It is larger than we would have originally liked, but it comes down to the question of harm, and is it a real difference in terms of permissions given, certainly even in the AONB. I know we're not in the AONB here. And is it harm by giving this application? And that's really what I think we need to consider, as well as obviously dealing with the bats. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, I think we need to bottom out how we do deal with the bats. I'm going to come back to Matt or maybe even Mehdi. We're told that if we're minded, and there seems to be a sympathy with this, which I understand, if we are minded to think that it might be acceptable, how do we deal with the bat issue? Can you give us some clear guidance, please?
I'd look for a backup from our legal assistant, but I would suggest that the recommendation is against officer's recommendation, well, to alter that to refuse it just on the bat issue and not to refuse it on the C4 issue. So it would be, I'm not entirely sure of the wording, but whether there could be a variance in terms of the outcome.
I see Mehdi's got his hand up. So what you're implying is that you would take that as the planning officer. I'm not putting, well, I'm putting words in your mouth, but in the form of a question, really. So if committee were, Mehdi, I will come to you, I promise. I'm trying to help you phrase your answer. So if members were minded that the principle of what the applicant wishes to do was not substantial and was okay because of its lack of visibility, or could be, what's the word I'm looking for? An exception to certain aspects of policy, possibly. What you're saying is if this was refused, which you implied it should be because of the bats, but if they came back with the same application and a bat survey, you'd take account of what we deliberated on tonight. Is that basically what you're saying? Or have I misinterpreted?
Thank you, Chairman. We have two issues here, or not two issues, or two ways, three ways you can technically approach this. Members could either refuse the application based on the issue of design, scale and substantial, alongside officers' other recommendation of the ecology issue or the insufficient, inadequate information to allow officers to make a sound planning judgment. Alternatively, you could go for the second option, which is to refuse the application disregarding the earlier refusal reasons on design and substantial and go straight for the bat issue. That way, the applicant would have one refusal reason. Should the item be reheard at committee again, then the only reasons or grounds that we could discuss would predominantly be on ecology. Mindful that there's an extension of time on this application which runs up until Friday, which we could technically do option 3, which is defer the application, allow the agent to submit the ecological surveys or carry out the, normally we don't hold an application on for such a long period of time, but given the circumstances, one approach could be to defer the application, knowing that past Friday they cannot appeal for non-determination, which would then allow the authority to receive whatever application supplementary to this submission on ecology can come in, and then refer this item back to another committee to consider the issue of ecology.
Well, that's exactly the sort of clear guidance I was hoping for, Mehdi, and I'm grateful. I see, Sharon, you've got your hand up. I will come to you. And I appreciate the pressure is very much that if we don't make determinations within certain dates, people can go to appeal for non-determination. And equally, there is a pressure that we need to really deal with applications in the prescribed time. I do get that, but just sometimes there needs to be a little scope for negotiation and provision of information. And the applicant did say he was surprised, which I was surprised that he said about not knowing that the bat survey, because I would have thought he would have been told. Sharon.
Yes, sorry, I don't think this is what my colleagues in planning maybe want, but I think it'd be remiss of me not to say something. I think you could possibly frame the resolution so that you delegate for officers to approve or subject to a satisfactory bat survey. So in the same way as you would have it subject to a section 106. I don't know whether that would be possible. I think colleagues in planning are not keen on that proposal, but I think you need to consider it.
Well, okay, well, that's legal advice. What's planning advice, Mehdi?
Thank you, Chair. Without completely disregarding Sharon's comments there, I think it's important to take on board conditioning such a ecological matter.
Sorry, I'm not suggesting conditioning it.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Sorry, I'm suggesting having the resolution so that before you issue the decision, you have a satisfactory bat survey. So that element is delegated to officers to deal with.
So that's to condition.
Yeah. That sounds like a condition.
Sorry, it's not, because you will not be issuing the decision. So the decision is subject to the receipt of the satisfactory bat survey in the same way as you would make it subject to a section 106. So you need to have the bat survey prior to making the decision.
But subject to is condition.
You won't issue the decision until after you've got the bat survey.
And it's satisfactory.
Yes. So you would delegate to officers to have a satisfactory bat survey. If you didn't have it, then it would be refused. Or the applicant may wish to withdraw. Does everyone else understand? Because I think I'm probably not being clear.
Well, look, trying to just chair this meeting in a proper manner. I've got 3 hands up. I've got someone gesticulating at me. So I'm not totally sure what the order is. Councillor McKinnon, is that a legacy hand or do you wish to come back? You want to come
back in as soon as that Councillor Lewis opened, but
right.
Others come in.
Councillor Somner, do you want to come back in or is that a legacy hand? Mehdi, do you want to come back in or is that a legacy hand?
The only issue with legal's approach there is that the information that's resubmitted in could be deemed unacceptable. That's the only point that I'll make. So that would put us back into refusal reasons until the information is fully satisfied, not just submitted. So the submission of information could still be unacceptable.
In which case you wouldn't grant the permission, would you?
Yes, that's right.
And it would have to be phrased in that way. Right. Others have spoken. Councillor Jeffrey, you haven't got your hand up on Zoom, but do you wish to speak?
Briefly, if I may. The comments being made by many members how valuable it was that they were at the site meeting. Councillor Law went down with COVID yesterday. I started reading these documents about macro. Sorry. Councillor Macro went down.
He wasn't there either.
Went down with COVID yesterday, and I started reading these documents halfway through today. So consequently, I've not only not had the benefit of being at the site meeting, I've also not had the benefit of a deep reading into this. What I will say is that there really does seem to be a very complex interplay of situations. I would feel very reluctant at the moment if we simply declined the application when there are so many issues which are very, very debatable. It would appear to me that what I have just heard from legal is a route through this particular mire, right or wrongly.
Wait, this isn't easy, I know, but let's go around the table again in order of those with their Zoom hands up. Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you. This might seem a little bit out of date given the discussion that's happened since, but I just wanted to make a point on if it helps members with considering, is it substantial, is it not, is it on the cusp? Remember that even if it was to be considered on the substantial side of things, it's still perfectly at liberty of the committee to make an exception and approve despite being against the policy. Mm-hmm. And I think that given the utterly enclosed nature of the site would be a pretty good reason. And that would also be a good reason for going against the design objections, which I think I disagree with as well. And so that was my comment, which probably belonged 15 minutes ago. And other than to say that I think the advice we've had from Mrs. Armour is perfectly sensible.
Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to clarify whether that option, Sharon, is better than deferring it.
That's probably for planning colleagues. So yeah, my option would be there'd be 2 things. So if you didn't receive it, there'd be a refusal reason as well. But I don't know planning. I know planning were reluctant to go down this route. So I think they probably need to say why.
Mehdi or Matthew?
I think it's twofold. Officers are being instructed in dealing with applications to not delay the determination of applications for important documents such as protected species. So to be consistent across applications, officers will and do look to refuse those applications. So don't stockpile applications to deal with those issues. Furthermore, if the documents were unacceptable, say they submitted the surveys, that it would highly likely officers would have to return to planning committee due to having further reasons for a refusal on the application. So it would return to in front of you in due course if those documents were unacceptable.
So by default, we've ended up with a deferral.
I don't think that's true.
Well,
in terms of the reasons for committee determination, if officers are likely to recommend refusal, it has to be presented to Eastern Area Planning Committee. So if a survey was conducted and was found to be unsatisfactory to officers, we would return to this point and present the application to Eastern Area Planning Committee once more, given the refusal reasons to adhere to the call-in form submitted.
I understand that. Yeah, I understand your advice, Matt. If something comes to committee and there needs to be a follow-on, or if there is a change, it would normally come back to committee. So I think that's a very valid point. Councillor Law, then I'm going to look for a proposal.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. On this issue of the bats, I very much would prefer, if we're going to go down that road, to do a deferral. It's the sensible, easy, understandable way of doing it. That would be that one. I'm grateful to Councillor McKinnon for coming back and raising the substantial debate, because I think this last 10 minutes we've been talking about the bats, and we've been, you know, I almost felt like it was just going to be the bats and that made the decision. We still have to, as a committee, to decide on substantial or not. And I would just say to Councillor McKinnon, without prejudice in one way or the other, if you think it's against policy, which I hear you say, you've got to have an exceptional reason. And the reason you have was not exceptional, because I could throw you immediately half a dozen examples. You're creating an awful precedent. If you say just because it's hidden and it can't be seen, it's an exception. That's not the way we've been interpreting that policy. But I think we've got to decide, is it substantial or not, first, before we then go on to decide how to handle the bats.
Well, I'm going to have to ask Mehdi or Matthew another question then. If we determine something that is outside policy, which we can do and have done, as long as we can justify it as an exception to policy, I think that's in our power to do. But if it's against policy, what we have had in the past, and I could throw you some examples on that, it goes to district. Now, that's an added level of complication. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to say this, applicant, because I'm trying to be obstructive. Far from it. I'm trying to be helpful. But it's an added level of complexity. And I don't know where to go on this. I really do need professional guidance as to whether we defer it, whether we approve it subject to a BAT survey, or whether it is against policy. We seem to have umpteen different variations on the theme here.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just
say
come in
that with great sympathy?
Could I make one comment? It's Councillor McKinnon, Chairman.
Yes.
That I take Councillor Law's point about it being against policy. It's not my position that it is against policy. And I perhaps withdraw the comment I made earlier. It's my position that it is not against policy because it is not substantial.
That does clarify. Thank you. Mehdi, come back to us, and then I'm looking for a proposal.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify, to put such a condition for a BAT survey to be submitted in, or approving it subject to a BAT survey being put in, the BAT survey in itself can come back with great cause and concern, which makes it conflict with policy to a degree, if I'm not mistaken. So what we're asking for technically is a condition to be applied, which can still be addressed, but still be unacceptable to the policy in question. So I would suggest a deferral.
Go on, Councillor.
You're looking for a proposal, Chairman. Let me propose we defer this. And the benefit of deferring it is we have a number of, it'll probably be deferred for 2, 3, 4 weeks. And then we have a number of, a lot more time to each of us, because I'm still not sure about this substantial, each of us to think this thing through. So the deferral helps with the bats. And I also think it helps with us trying to get a decision on the substantial bit.
Does that find a seconder? Councillor Somner.
Yes.
Just make a statement. Yes, please.
Yeah, I was going to propose the deferral. I'm happy to second it. I think there's a key message and a key requirement in this. One is pre-application discussions. Anybody that's tuned into this, do them, because a lot of these conversations could be addressed in advance of the application coming before us, who will play table tennis with it. We are all sitting here wanting to do the right thing and struggling to find the words to do it without leaving ourselves wide open. Let's be quite honest. What I would like is a deferral as proposed and a guarantee of continued conversation between officers and the agent applicant so that we make sure that these issues are fully understood. The paperwork will come back, and when the paperwork comes back, it needs to be absolutely nailed down with percentages in there so that we've got all of that information in front of us as well. If there are increases in the floor plan, let's see what they were. Let's see what they would have been with the previously approved application. And let's see what the next step is, which is the latest application from there. Please, let's have it broken down and absolutely crystal clear for us to sit down and make a decision. Thank you, Chairman.
I very often oppose deferrals, but I think in this particular case, I don't think we can do anything other than defer, because otherwise we would be making policy on the hoof at a planning committee, which I am dead against, or trying to bend over backwards to say it's an exception to policy when we don't. I haven't heard the information that says we are, and then we've still got the issue of bats. So you've got a proposal for a deferral, which is seconded. Those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's unanimous. So look, please come back with a bat survey and please talk to officers. It's not a negative, but it's not a big positive either, but there's room for talking. And I'll stop at that. Right, members, we got there. Wherever